Amelia Carter pressed both hands against a dying stranger's chest in the middle of a dirt road, while three men on horseback looked down, said nothing, and kept riding. She had $8 to her name. A daughter at home who hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. A farm being stolen from her by a man in an expensive suit. And a tax deadline 39 days away that she had no earthly way of meeting. She knelt in the dust anyway. She didn't know the old man's name. She didn't know he had once built one of the most powerful financial empires in America. She didn't know his son was already searching for him, or that this single moment on this empty road was about to change every last thing about her future. She only knew one thing. No human being deserved to die alone while the world walked past. So she stayed. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that dirt road in Red Creek, Colorado, 1891, and find out what one act of stubborn, reckless kindness set into motion. The morning Harlan Whitmore first came to her door, Amelia Carter had been awake since 4. Not because she couldn't sleep. Because sleep was a luxury she had learned to ration the same way she rationed flour and lamp oil and the small store of hope she kept in a locked place in her chest that she only opened when strictly necessary. There was always something that needed doing before the sun came up. Bread to start the garden to water, before the heat turned punishing Lillian's dress that needed a seam resewn before school. The list was never finished. The list she had accepted would never be finished. That was survival. You didn't finish the list. You just stayed ahead of it. She was beating dough on the kitchen table when she heard the carriage on the road. She knew before she went to the window that it wasn't anyone she recognized. The horses moved too easily, too well kept their shoes too clean against the dry summer road. The carriage was black lacquer with brass fittings. That kind of carriage didn't belong in Red Creek, Colorado. 2 lawyers climbed out first, then Harlan Whitmore. How was a medium-sized man who had learned how to make himself feel large. Expensive clothes, a hat that cost more than Amelia's monthly food budget, and a smile that sat on his face like something placed there deliberately, a tool chosen for the occasion. Amelia wiped her hands on her apron and went to the porch. She did not invite him in. Mrs. Carter. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her with that calibrated smile. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. You are, she said. What do you want? A flicker behind his eyes, a man recalculating, finding a different approach. I've been speaking with several families in this valley about opportunities I believe could benefit them considerably. Difficult year, the drought. A lot of folks are facing real hardship. He spread his hands. I'd like to help. By buying their land for a quarter of what it's worth. The smile didn't break. By offering fair market value for properties that may otherwise be lost to tax liens or debt in the coming months. This farm isn't going to be lost, Mrs. Carter. He said her name the way certain men say a woman's name, gently, patiently, as if they are explaining something to someone who can't quite follow the logic. I've looked at the county records. Your husband's estate, God rest him, left certain obligations that I suspect you're finding difficult to manage alone. I'm offering you $400 and a clean exit. You and your daughter could start fresh somewhere. $400. She said it flatly. That's a generous... This land is worth $1,200 on its worst day. She kept her voice. She had learned that evening voices were more frightening than raised ones to men like Whitmore. I know what the county records show. I also know what my deed says and what my title says and what the tax register says, and everything is in order. He looked at her for a moment. Then the smile shifted, not disappearing exactly, but becoming something else underneath. Take some time to think about it, he said pleasantly. These situations have a way of becoming more complicated than people expect. He tipped his hat. He got back in his carriage. Amelia stood on her porch and watched the black lacquer disappear down the road and felt the specific cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding exactly what a person meant by what they said. She went back inside. Lillian was standing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, dark eyes serious. Who was that? A man with a problem, Amelia said. She went back to her dough. Get dressed for school. What kind of problem? The kind where he thinks other people's things belong to him. She pushed the heel of her hand into the dough. Go on now. Lillian went. She had her father's eyes and her father's habit of reading the room before she spoke, and this morning she read it correctly and did not push further. Amelia worked the dough and thought about Thomas. Thomas Carter had been a careful man, careful with his words, careful with his hands, careful with the papers he left behind. The deed to this land was clean and properly witnessed. The taxes were filed correctly. The title was held free of her husband's mining obligations, which he had understood enough law to keep separate. He had protected her in that quiet, forward-thinking way of his from exactly this kind of predator. She thought about the handprint in the cement of the back step. Lillian at 4 years old, small palm pressed flat, the specific serious expression she'd worn while Thomas guided her hand. That print was still there, still exact. She thought about the tin box under the bedroom floorboard with the photograph inside. She thought $63 in 39 days. She had 8. She shaped the loaves and set them to rise, and went out to the garden and worked in the early heat and did not allow herself to think further than the next task, because the distance between where she was and where she needed to be was exactly the kind of gap that could swallow a person whole if they looked at it directly for too long. That afternoon, she loaded the week's washing into the wagon and drove to town. She did not see the man in the ditch on the way in. She saw him on the way back. She almost missed him entirely. She was calculating Mrs. Doyle the possible loan, the Hendersons and their harvest timing, and Lillian was asleep against her arm, and the sun was sitting flat and brutal on the back of her neck, and the shape in the ditch looked at first glance like a bundle of discarded clothing. Then it moved. She pulled the reins hard enough that the horse tossed his head. "Mama, stay here." She was down from the wagon and across the ditch before Lillian finished waking. She reached the old man and crouched and pressed her hand against his face and felt the burning heat of fever in his skin and the shallow, paper-tearing sound of his breathing. And she understood immediately that he had been here for a long time and that people had been passing him all day. The road behind her was empty now. It had not always been empty today. She got her arm behind his shoulders. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened. Gray, clear, startlingly alert for a man in his condition. The eyes of someone whose mind was still fully present, even as the body had begun to fail. "I hear you," he said. His voice was low and rough and educated. "I've got water. Don't fight me getting you up." "I won't." He pressed his palm flat to the ground and helped her lift him, a man who had enough self-possession, even half dead in a ditch, to assist in his own rescue rather than surrender entirely to it. She noted that, filed it somewhere. "Lillian," she called. "Canteen." Her daughter appeared at the edge of the ditch with the canteen in both hands, watching the old man with the same serious, unfrightened attention she gave most things. Amelia held the water to his lips. He drank in slow, controlled sips. "There's been people on this road all day," Amelia said. Not anger, just fact. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, something older. "People rarely stop." "Well, I have." She looked him over. His clothes had once been decent wool coat, well made, the kind of coat a man buys to last. Boots that fit properly, which meant he wasn't a man who had never owned anything. But no bag, no horse, no companion visible in either direction. "Can you stand with help?" "You've got it." Getting him into the wagon was a project. Amelia was strong, and he was determined, but his legs were unreliable, and the step was high, and there was a moment where the whole enterprise teetered. Lillian solved it by scrambling up first and pulling from above with both hands fisted in the old man's coat, which produced from him something Amelia had not expected. A smile. Real and unguarded and tired, the smile of a man caught off guard by something that felt like grace. "Thank you, young miss," he said. Lillian, with her mother's directness. "What's your name?" "Walter. Walter Whitaker." "I'm Lillian. That's my mama." She stops. He looked at Amelia. "I noticed." She picked up the reins. "Amelia Carter. I've got a farm 2 miles up. You're coming there. You're going to drink more water, and then you're going to tell me what's actually wrong with you, because this isn't just heat, and I'd like to know what I'm dealing with." Howe was quiet a moment. Then, "Mrs. Carter, I haven't been spoken to that plainly in a very long time. Was that unwelcome?" "Quite the opposite." She clicked to the horse and they moved. He slept for 14 hours on the cot in the sewing room. His fever broke near midnight. Amelia checked it twice without waking him, standing in the dark doorway with the thermometer and the lamp turned low, watching the rise and fall of his chest and making sure it stayed steady. She could not have said why it mattered so much that it stayed steady. She told herself it was because she was not a person who did things halfway. If she decided to help a man, she helped him. That was all. She went back to bed and did not entirely believe herself. In the morning, he was different, still weak. She could see the careful way he conserved movement, the slight pause before rising from the chair. But his eyes were fully present, and his color had returned to something that looked like a living man's color rather than a dying one. He came out of the sewing room with his clothes neatened, his coat folded over his arm. "I'd like to be useful," he said before she offered breakfast. She pointed at the table. "Eat first." He sat across from Lillian, who had her book open beside her plate, a habit Amelia had stopped fighting. Walter looked at the novel. "Any good?" Lillian looked up. "The middle is slow. The ending's worth it." "You haven't finished it." "Mama told me the ending is worth it. She doesn't lie about books." Walter looked at Amelia. Something behind his eyes shifted, a reassessment quick and quiet. "You read novels?" "When I have the time." "What else?" She considered whether this was small talk or genuine interest. The stillness in his face said genuine. "Land law when I need to. Farming almanacs. Whatever Lillian brings home." He nodded slowly, applied himself to his breakfast with the focused economy of a man who has trained himself over a long life not to waste things. After a moment, "Your husband was a farmer." "Miner. The farm was mine. He helped." "Was?" 2 years ago. Mining accident." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." The silence between them settled without discomfort. Amelia noticed it, the particular quality of a man who had made his peace with quiet, who didn't feel compelled to fill it with performance. Most men did. The ones who didn't were either very sad or very old, or had learned something the hard way. She suspected Walter Whitaker was all three. He was as good as his word about useful. By the second day, he had examined the barn bracing and suggested a modification. She was skeptical and said so directly, and he explained the engineering principle behind it clearly enough that she could follow the reasoning and see he was right. By the third day, he was making the adjustment himself, slow and careful in the heat, taking the breaks he needed, but never asking for permission to need them. She watched him from the kitchen window. She recognized that kind of working. The working that is also reckoning. The specific way a person's body moves when the hands are trying to earn something the mind hasn't yet decided how to ask for. She understood it completely. On the fourth evening, without announcement, he fixed the porch step. The soft board replaced sound timber from the back of the barn, everything solid. She stepped on it and felt nothing give. "Thomas stacked that timber," she said. "Good eye for quality." Walter didn't look up from packing the toolbox. He was a careful man. "Yes." She looked at the step. He was. She did not say, "It is strange and something close to painful. How much your being here makes me remember that." She filed that thought in the place where she kept the things she needed to examine later and didn't examine now. Lillian had adopted Walter with characteristic practicality. By the end of the first week, she was sitting beside him in the evenings while he talked quiet stories about places he had traveled, told with a restrained wonder that suggested a man for whom the world had remained interesting despite whatever had removed him from it. The Atlantic, a city in France, a Montana winter where a man could lose himself between his house and his barn. Amelia listened from the kitchen doorway, pretended to dry dishes. Then one evening Lillian asked, "Did you have children?" The pause, brief and real and careful. "A son, Nathaniel. He's in New York." A beat. "He runs the business I built." "Lillian, why aren't you there?" "I left." "Did he want you to leave?" "No. She processed this with the unsentimental focus of a child, for whom honesty is not cruelty, but simply the shortest distance between 2 points. Then you should go back, or write to him. He's probably been worried this whole time. The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into water. Amelia stopped pretending to dry the dish. Walter was still for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You're probably right." Later after. Lillian was asleep. Amelia found him at the kitchen table with paper and her pen. He was staring at the blank page. She poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, and set one in front of him, and sat down across from him, and did not speak first. The lamp burned low between them. Outside, the Colorado dark pressed flat against the windows. "I built something," he said finally, not looking at her, looking at the paper. "A company. A good one. When things went wrong between my son and me, when I had done damage, I didn't know how to undo. I thought the right thing was to remove myself. I thought staying was making it worse." "Was it?" "I believed so." He picked up the pen, set it down. "I'm no longer certain I was thinking clearly." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "What kind of damage?" He looked up then. Those gray eyes carrying the full weight of a specific kind of regret, not the loose, shapeless regret of general failure, but the precise located regret of a man who can identify the exact moment he chose wrong and has lived inside that knowledge ever since. "The kind a father does," he said, "when he is so determined to build something permanent in the world that he forgets to look at what's happening inside his own house." She thought about Thomas, about the way she used to fall asleep alone on the nights he worked late, and the mornings she'd woken before him, just to have a few minutes of quiet, and how she would give anything now for one of those ordinary, unremarkable nights back. "Write the letter," she said. "He may not come." "Then you'll have written it anyway. That matters whether he comes or not." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully name, recognition maybe, or the relief of being understood by someone who had not been briefed on all the relevant history. He picked up the pen and began to write. She sat with him until he finished. She didn't read over his shoulder. She didn't ask what it said. When he folded it, she set it with her things for Thursday's trip to town, without comment, and that was the whole of it. She had $63 still to find. 39 days still on the clock. Whitmore's name had come up twice more this week, once through Mrs. Doyle, who'd heard the Brevin family had been served a legal notice on a mortgage that everyone knew had been settled years ago. Once through old Mr. Garrett at the feed store, who'd said very quietly in the way that men said things they didn't want attributed to them, that Whitmore had friends in the county clerk's office, and that records had a way of looking different than people remembered them. She had thought about this on the drive home, and thought about it again now, watching Walter fold his letter. And she thought about the moment 3 days ago, when she had set a county land filing from 1887 on the kitchen table to check a property boundary notation, and Walter had glanced at it from across the room and said without being asked and without looking twice, "That surveyor's mark is inconsistent with the rest of the document. It may have been added after the fact." She had looked at him. He had looked back at her with an expression of complete neutrality and said, "My father was in land development." She had nodded and not asked the next question. She was asking it now, internally, in the private examining room of her own mind, where she took out things she'd been filing away and looked at them properly. The way he read documents. The engineering knowledge. The manner not arrogant, but the manner of a man accustomed to being listened to in rooms where the stakes were high. The way he had stood beside her when Whitmore came silent and still. And the way Whitmore, a man who had not shown uncertainty to anyone in this valley, had looked at Walter Whitaker with the first real wariness she'd seen from him. Walter looked up from his folded letter. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking." "About?" She met his eyes. "About who you are. About what you left behind. About why a man who can read a land filing at 20 feet and identify a forged surveyor's mark is sleeping on a cot in my sewing room instead of somewhere that would recognize him." Walter was quiet for a long moment. "I needed to stop being recognized," he said carefully. "For a while." "Why?" Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that contains a real answer being weighed against the cost of giving it. Because I had built everything I set out to build, he said. And I looked at it one morning and realized I had no idea whether any of it had been worth what it cost. His eyes stayed on hers. I'm still working that out. She looked at him steadily. And the letter is that part of working it out. The most important part. She nodded slowly. She did not push further. A man who had walked away from something large and was walking back toward it. He would arrive at his own pace, and pushing rarely made anyone arrive faster or more whole. Thursday, she said. I'll post it Thursday. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Amelia, she said. She wasn't entirely sure why she said it then. You've been here 2 weeks and you fixed my porch. I think you've earned the first name. Something moved in his face. The faintest warmth earned and real. Amelia, he said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the sound of another person breathing in her house, and she did not analyze what she felt about it, but she let herself feel it, the particular quality of not being alone in the dark that she had not felt in 2 years and had not known until this moment how much she had missed. $63. 39 days. She did not feel the numbers the same way she had this morning. The arithmetic was the same. Something underneath it had shifted. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the corridor between waking and sleep, where she still sometimes sent Thomas sentences. She couldn't say out loud, she sent him this one. I stopped for a stranger today. Well, 2 weeks ago. I think you would have done the same. She thought, as she always did in some stubborn chamber of her chest, that he received it. Then she slept. Thursday came and went, and the letter went with it. Amelia dropped it at the postal office between picking up a sack of cornmeal and returning Mrs. Doyle's borrowed pie dish, and she did it without ceremony, without announcement, the way she did most important things quietly, as though the moment were ordinary, as though her hands weren't holding something that might detonate like a charge in a mine shaft somewhere in New York City and bring down walls that had been standing for years. She didn't tell Walter she'd sent it. He knew. They didn't discuss it further. What they discussed that evening was Whitmore. Walter had been in town himself that afternoon, his first time making the walk since arriving, moving slowly but steadily, the way a man moves when he is determined not to show how much the effort costs him. He had gone to the feed store and the dry goods. And Amelia suspected somewhere else, because when he came back, his expression had the quality of a man who has learned something he was already halfway expecting and does not like being right. He waited until Lillian was in bed. Then he sat down across from Amelia at the kitchen table and said without preamble, Whitmore has a contact in the county clerk's office, a man named Gerald Pruitt. Pruitt has been making small alterations to historical land filings. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would catch the eye of someone not looking for it specifically. Adjustments to dates. Survey notations that don't match the original survey lines. Enough to create ambiguity that Whitmore's lawyers can exploit in court. Amelia set down her coffee. How do you know this? Mr. Garrett at the feed store. He's been watching it happen for 2 months, and he's frightened and angry in roughly equal measure. Walter's voice was even. He told me because he didn't know who else to tell, and because he said you were the only woman in this valley stubborn enough to still be here, and that if anyone was going to do something about it, it was probably you. She absorbed this. Did he give you specifics? Which filings? The Brevin mortgage, the Kellerman title from 1883, and he thinks your husband's original homestead claim may have been targeted, though he isn't certain. The specific cold again, the same one she'd felt watching Whitmore's carriage disappear down the road. Thomas's homestead claim is clean. I checked it myself. I'd like to look at it. Tonight. If you don't mind. She got the folder. Walter went through it the way he always went through documents, slowly, systematically, with the focused quiet of a man for whom this kind of reading is as natural as breathing. Amelia sat across from him and watched his face and read it the way she had learned to read difficult things directly and without flinching, because knowing was always better than not knowing even when what you learned was hard. He stopped on the 3rd page. His finger rested on a line of text. He didn't speak immediately. Walter. This notation. He turned the page toward her and pointed. This surveyor's mark. Do you see how the ink color is marginally different from the rest of the paragraph? She leaned in, looked. It took her a moment in the lamplight. Then she saw it. Barely perceptible, but there a slightly different shade. Fresher. Someone added that. Recently, I'd say. Within the last few months. She straightened. Her hands were very still on the table. That mark moves my eastern boundary line 40 feet. Yes. 40 feet that includes the creek access. Yes. She said nothing for a moment. The creek access was not decorative. Without it, the farm's irrigation system failed. Without irrigation in a drought year, the crops failed. Without crops, there was no income, and no food, and no reason for the farm to exist. It was elegant in the way that certain kinds of deliberate cruelty were elegant surgical specific, designed to look like a technicality while functioning as a death sentence. He's been here, she said, or someone working for him has been here, in the county records. With Pruitt's help, yes. Can it be proven? Walter looked at the page for a moment. The original survey is on file in Denver. If the Denver copy doesn't match this notation, then there's your proof of alteration. He paused. Getting to Denver, getting access to those records, comparing them formally, and presenting the discrepancy to a court that requires resources and time, both of which I don't have. No. He was quiet. But I may know someone who does. She looked at him. He met her eyes, said nothing further. The name hung unspoken between them. Nathaniel, and she did not reach for it, and he did not offer it, and they sat in the lamplight with the altered document between them and the silence of two people who are both thinking the same thing and not yet ready to say it out loud. How long, she said, before Whitmore moves on the altered notation? If he follows the pattern he's used with the other properties, 2 weeks, perhaps 3. I have 36 days to the tax deadline. Then you have time. A beat. Some. She nodded, took the document back, put it in the folder and the folder in the drawer with the deliberate motions of a woman who is choosing consciously not to be defeated by what she has just learned. Then we figure out what we can do with the time we have. Walter watched her with those clear gray eyes. Most people, he said, when they discover the ground has been cut out from under them, sit down. I know. She locked the drawer. I never learned how. He almost smiled. It was becoming a language between them. Almost the things he almost said, the things she chose not to say, the specific grammar of two people managing more than they were showing. The next morning, Amelia drove to Mrs. Doyle's. Martha Doyle was 71 years old, had outlived 2 husbands, and had an opinion about everything which she shared freely and without apology. She was also the closest thing Red Creek had to an institutional memory, because she had been here longer than almost anyone, and she had paid attention. Amelia told her about the altered document. Not everything, not Walter, not the specifics of what he'd observed in the deed. But enough. Mrs. Doyle's face did a complicated series of things. Pruitt, she said finally. I did wonder. He's been nervous as a cat at a dog show for 2 months, buying things he shouldn't be able to afford on a clerk's salary. She set down her tea. Amelia, you need to be careful. If Whitmore knows, you know. He doesn't know I know. Yet. Yet, she agreed. What are you going to do? Amelia was quiet for a moment. She was working through the shape of something that wasn't yet fully formed, a plan with solid edges and a soft middle, the way most plans looked before you thought them through completely. I'm going to get a copy of the original survey from Denver. Somehow. And I'm going to find every other person in this valley who has had their records touched, and I'm going to make sure they know what's been done to them. That's a lot of some days and somehows. I know. Mrs. Doyle studied her. You've got someone helping you. Don't tell me you don't. I can see it in how you're carrying yourself. You're not carrying it alone. Amelia said nothing. Is it that old man you brought in off the road? People have been talking. People talk about everything. That's not a no. Mrs. Doyle set down her cup with a decisive click. I don't care who he is or where he came from. But Amelia, be careful about depending on a stranger when you don't know his full story. Men with mysteries aren't always mysteries worth solving. Amelia drove home with that sitting in her chest alongside everything else. She turned it over, The way she turned over difficult things. The honest part of her knew Mrs. Doyle wasn't wrong. She knew almost nothing verifiable about Walter Whitaker. He had told her his name and his son's name, and a version of his history that was real, she believed, but incomplete. She had let him into her home and her documents, and if she was being honest with herself, into a significant portion of her thinking. She had done it because every instinct she had built over 31 years of reading people and situations and rooms told her he was exactly what he appeared to be, a man trying to find his way back from something he'd walked away from, using whatever useful things he had left to earn a kind of peace. She was probably right about him. She was also aware that probably was carrying a lot of weight. She got home to find Walter on the porch with Lillian, who was supposed to be doing arithmetic for school tomorrow, and was instead listening to him explain something with 2 sticks and a patch of dirt, which turned out to be how to calculate the area of an irregular field using a method Amelia had never seen taught in any school book. "That's not in her lessons," Amelia said. "No." Walter agreed, not looking up. "It's more useful than her lessons." Lillian delighted. "Mr. Walter says mathematicians invented calculus to solve exactly this kind of problem and that I could learn it by the time I'm 14 if I wanted to." Mr. Walter is very confident about 14-year-olds. "Mr. Walter taught it to himself at 13, Walter said mildly. Amelia looked at him. He looked back. The thing in the air between them, the weight of his unspoken history, sat there quietly, exactly as it had been sitting for 2 weeks, and Amelia decided that tonight she was going to address it directly. She waited until Lillian was asleep. Then she came to the kitchen table and sat down and said, "I need to know who you are, not the version you've been giving me, the full version." Walter was quiet. "I'm not asking to be difficult," she said. "I'm asking because I have a child in this house, and a predator trying to take my land, and 36 days, and I need to know whether the man I've been trusting with my documents and my situation is who I believe he is." A long pause. "What do you believe I am?" he asked. "A man who built something significant, who knows the law and finance and engineering, and speaks like someone who has spent his life in rooms where important decisions were made, who left that life for reasons that cost him considerably, and who sent a letter to his son last week that scared him more than anything he's faced in years." She kept her eyes on him. "That's what I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong." Walter was still. Then he set his hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized, the same gesture he used when he was about to say something he'd been deciding whether to say. "Whitaker Financial," he said. "New York City. Founded 1851. By the time I stepped back, it managed assets for 11 of the largest railroad companies on the eastern seaboard, 4 shipping lines, and approximately 60 private family trusts." A pause. "I built it from a single loan office my father left me, over 40 years. The room was very quiet. Nathaniel has run it for the past 3 years, he continued. He's capable, more capable than I gave him credit for, because I spent 20 years being too occupied to notice his capabilities. I spent those same 20 years teaching him by example that the work mattered more than the people doing it." He looked down at his hands. "By the time I understood what I had done, I didn't know how to undo it. So I left instead. Which was, as a solution, worse than useless." Amelia took this in. "How did you end up in a ditch on a Colorado road?" "I've been moving west for 8 months, working when I could find it, stopping when I needed to." He looked up. "I had a great deal of thinking to do. I discovered that thinking is easier when the body is occupied with something real. And the thinking, has it arrived anywhere?" A moment. "It's arrived at the letter." She looked at him steadily. "Walter, the letter was a beginning. But let me be direct with you about something, because I think you're a man who responds better to directness than to delicacy." She leaned forward slightly. "You've been in this house for 2 weeks, and you've made yourself indispensable, and you've been generous with your knowledge, and I am grateful for all of it. But I need to know, when that letter reaches Nathaniel, if he comes, what happens to this situation? What happens to what you know about Whitmore's scheme? Are you willing to use what you have to help stop what's being done to this valley? Or are you here to work out your conscience, and then move on?" The question landed exactly as she meant it to, plainly, without apology, at the center of what mattered. Walter looked at her for a long moment. "I'm willing," he said. "I have been since I saw that document 3 nights ago. I was waiting to understand whether you wanted my help or wanted to solve it yourself." "I want to solve it myself, but I'm not a fool about what that requires." She sat back. "Can you get the Denver records?" "I can write to people who can." "Will they respond quickly?" "Yes." "Then do it tomorrow." He nodded. "Amelia." He said her name with a particular weight. She was beginning to recognize the weight of something he meant, but was choosing carefully. "What I am, what Nathaniel is, I want you to know that none of that changes what this is, what we're doing here. This isn't about resources solving a problem. This is about what's right." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "That's why I trust you." The next 10 days were the fastest. Amelia could remember since the week after Thomas died, when time had moved in a strange, compressed way, as though grief had a metabolic effect on the clock. Walter wrote 3 letters. One to a former associate in Denver, with access to the State Land Records Office. One to a judge in Pueblo he had dealt with a decade earlier on a railroad title dispute, and who Walter described with the measured precision of a man who chooses his words as incorruptible. One to a man he didn't name in a city he didn't specify, who he said could verify certain financial transactions if it came to that. He also quietly, and with the same deliberate understatement he applied to everything, began talking to people in Red Creek, not announcing himself, not making speeches, just talking at the feed store at the postal office at the edge of Mr. Garrett's property on a Saturday morning, when Garrett was fixing his fence and Walter happened to be passing. The way certain kinds of men talk, the kind of talking that looks like nothing from the outside and is from the inside. The careful assembly of a picture that will matter later. Amelia watched him do it and understood with increasing clarity exactly what kind of man Walter Whitaker had been in the world he had walked away from. The kind who won things, quietly, by understanding the shape of the ground before anyone else did. She watched and she learned, and she continued to work the washing. The garden, the arithmetic of survival, that didn't pause for revelations or strategies or letters waiting to be answered. Lillian, meanwhile, had begun teaching herself calculus from a book Walter had quietly produced from somewhere, a slim, leather-bound volume that Amelia suspected he had ordered from town and paid for without mentioning it. She found her daughter at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, 3 days running, working through problems with the focused intensity of a person who has discovered an appetite. "Mr. Walter says I'm fast," Lillian reported without looking up from the page. "Mr. Walter is right," Amelia said, watching her daughter's pen move across the paper, and felt something complicated and warm in her chest. On the 11th day, Whitmore came back. He came with a lawyer this time. A compact, precise man named Aldrich, who carried a leather case and spoke in the measured tones of someone who has learned that sounding reasonable is more persuasive than sounding threatening. Whitmore stood back and let Aldrich do the speaking, which was new, and which told Amelia that the approach had been recalibrated. She was on the porch when they arrived. Walter was in the barn. She did not call him. Aldrich laid it out cleanly. There was, he said, a discrepancy in the eastern boundary notation of the original homestead claim that had come to the county's attention during a routine review. The county was, of course, not suggesting any impropriety, but in the interest of proper record-keeping, they would need to reconcile the notation against the current survey, a process that would unfortunately require the relevant section of the property to be restricted from use pending resolution. The process could take, he estimated, 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 months without the creek access. 2 to 3 months during the harvest season. She would lose everything without firing a single legal shot. "I see," Amelia said. She looked at Whitmore, who was watching her with the flat, assessing expression she had seen once before the face beneath the smile. "And if I were to sell now," she said, "would the discrepancy resolve itself?" A pause. Aldrich and Whitmore exchanged a look that was not quite fast enough. "The county's review process is independent of any private transaction," Aldrich began. "Of course it is," Amelia said. "Thank you both for coming. I'll be in touch." She went back inside and closed the door and stood with her back against it and breathed. Walter appeared from the barn doorway across the yard, took one look at her face through the window, and came inside without being asked. "How bad?" he said. "They're moving on the notation. 2 to 3 months restricted access to the creek." She pushed off the door. "We need the Denver records." "The letter was 8 days ago. I'd expect a response by—" "I know, but 8 days feels like 8 months right now." He looked at her. Something in his face did a thing she had seen once before, the night he finished the letter to Nathaniel, a decision being made behind the eyes, something coming to the surface from where it had been held carefully below. "There is something else I can do," he said. "I've been waiting because it involves using a name I've been trying not to use. But there may not be more time for waiting." She looked at him directly. "What name?" "Mine." He held her gaze. "The full weight of it. Used correctly in the right circles will move certain things faster than any letter. You'd expose yourself." "Yes." "Why have you been avoiding that?" I was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't sure I had the right to use what I'd built as leverage again. Not before I'd made things right with Nathaniel. It felt like going back to the same pattern." A pause. "But I think I've been wrong about that too. There's a difference between using power to build an empire and using it to stop a man from stealing a widow's farm." She looked at him for a long moment. "Walter," she said, "don't do anything yet. Wait 2 more days for the Denver response." She said not because she didn't want his help, but because she had spent 2 years making her own decisions, and she needed this next step to come from a place of choice, not desperation. "If the response doesn't come, we do it your way." He nodded. 2 days. They were the longest 2 days Amelia could remember since the days after the mine collapse, when she'd waited for news that had finally come, in the form of a man in a dusty coat, standing at her door with his hat in his hands, and an expression she had understood before he opened his mouth. She worked. She always worked. The garden, the washing, the fence repair along the north edge that she'd been putting off for a month. She moved fast and stayed occupied, and didn't let her mind rest long enough to give fear a proper foothold. Lillian, with her unfailing instinct for her mother's emotional state, stayed close without being asked. She helped in the garden without complaint. She didn't argue about bedtime. She brought Amelia a cup of tea on the second evening silently and set it on the table and went back to her calculus book. And Amelia had to look at the ceiling for a moment before she trusted herself to say thank you. On the evening of the second day, Walter came in from the porch with a letter in his hand. He set it on the table in front of her. Denver postmark. Heavy paper. She looked at it without touching it for a moment, the way you look at something that might be either the thing you needed or the worst possible news, and you are not quite ready to find out which. She picked it up and opened it and read it. Then she read it again. "The Denver record," she said slowly, "does not contain the notation." "No," Walter said. He had read it already, she could see that. "The original survey has no eastern boundary modification of any kind. The mark in your document was added after the original filing. It is provably not original. This is evidence of document fraud." "Yes." "Committed with the involvement of a county official." "Yes." She set the letter down. Her hands were steady. Steadier, in fact, than they had been in weeks, because there was something about holding proof in your hands that had a stabilizing effect, that turned a threat from a shape in the dark into a specific thing with specific edges, and specific things with specific edges could be fought. "We need to go to the judge," she said. "In Pueblo," Walter agreed. "Judge Harmon, I've already written. He's expecting to hear from me." She looked up at him. "You wrote before I said yes." "I wrote before because I believed you would say yes." A beat. "Was I wrong?" She almost smiled despite everything. "No, you weren't wrong." "I rarely am about people," he said, and it was said without arrogance, simply as a fact about himself, the kind of fact a man states when he has lived long enough to know his own capacities. "When can we go to Pueblo?" "I'd suggest Friday. That gives us time to prepare the documentation and gives Judge Harmon time to receive my letter." "That's 5 days." "Yes." "A lot can happen in 5 days." "A lot has happened in 2 weeks," he said. and the particular quality in his voice when he said it, the weight of what had shifted between them in those 2 weeks, the weight of everything both of them had chosen not to say out loud, made her look at him sharply and then look away. "Walter," she said to the table, not to him. "The letter. It's been 12 days. I know. Is no answer an answer?" He was quiet for a moment. "With Nathaniel," he said slowly. "I genuinely don't know. He could be angry. He could be trying to decide. He could have come and gone back before arriving as he's done before with things that frightened him." He paused. "He frightens easily, though he would die before admitting it. He gets that from me." She looked at him then. "You sound like you miss him." "I have missed him for 3 years." He said it with the flat honesty of a man who has moved past the point of dressing up true things. "I missed him for years before I left. That is perhaps the worst part to admit." She said nothing. She let the silence carry it. Outside, the Colorado dark had settled in, and the night sounds had started, the crickets and the occasional far-off cry of something hunting and the low breathing of the horses in the barn. The sounds of a world that continued regardless of what the people inside it were carrying. "He'll come," Amelia said. She didn't know why she said it. She said it the same way she said things to Thomas in the corridor between waking and sleeping, because she believed it in the stubborn, unverifiable way she believed in things that mattered. Walter looked at her. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I think he will too." They sat in the kitchen with the letter from Denver between them and the lamp burning low, and neither of them spoke again for a while, and the silence had the quality not of absence, but of presence. The specific presence of two people who are both carrying more than they can put into words, and have found in each other someone worth sitting beside in the difficulty of it. Amelia thought about Whitmore, about Pruitt and the altered records, and the 2 to 3 months, and the creek access, and the harvest. She thought about Friday and Pueblo and Judge Harmon, and what it would mean to walk into a court proceeding with a provable fraud, and a man who understood the law from the inside the way most people understood their own kitchens. She thought about the tax deadline. 34 days now. She thought about Nathaniel Whitaker, somewhere in New York, or on a westbound train, holding a letter from a father he had believed was finished with him, deciding whether to come or stay. She thought about all of it, and then she did what she always did with the things that were too large and too uncertain to hold all at once. She let them go for tonight. She went to bed. She slept. And 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, when the air already had the weight of late summer in it, and the road out front was white with dust, a wagon came down from the direction of town, moving at a pace that suggested the driver had somewhere urgent to be. Amelia was in the garden when she heard it. She straightened and shielded her eyes and looked. The wagon stopped at her gate. The man who climbed down was not old. He was somewhere in his early 40s, sharply dressed in clothes that were expensive but road dusty, and he moved with the contained energy of a person who had been sitting still for too long and was finally allowed to move. He had gray eyes, the specific shade of gray she had been looking at across her kitchen table for 3 weeks. He stood at the gate and looked at the farmhouse, and then at the garden, and then finally at her. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was steadier than his eyes. "My name is Nathaniel Whitaker. I believe my father is here." Amelia set down her trowel. She looked at him for a moment, at the gray eyes that were Walter's eyes, at the set of the jaw that was Walter's jaw, at the contained, frightened hope on the face of a man who had crossed half a country because of a letter and was now standing at a farm gate, not quite sure what he would find on the other side of it. "He's in the barn," she said. "Go on." Nathaniel Whitaker opened the gate. He walked across the yard. He stopped at the barn door. And Amelia picked up her trowel and turned back to her garden, because what happened next was not hers to witness. Some things needed to happen in private. Some things were worth crossing half a country for. And some silences, the silence from the barn, the long-held breath kind that lasted several minutes before she heard very faintly the sound of 2 men talking in low voices, were the loudest thing she had ever heard. They stayed in that barn for 40 minutes. Amelia knew because she counted. Not deliberately. She wasn't the kind of woman who stood at a garden row pretending to work while actually watching a barn door and tracking time. She was genuinely working, genuinely focused on the beans that needed thinning, and the squash that had gotten ahead of her this week. But some part of her was listening the way a person listens when something important is happening nearby, and that part counted without being asked to. 40 minutes. Then Walter came out first, moving with the careful steadiness she had learned to read, not weakness, but the particular economy of a man managing more than he wanted to show. His face was different. She couldn't have said exactly how. The same lines, the same gray eyes. But something had shifted behind them, the way a room looks different after a window has been opened. Nathaniel came out behind him. He had been crying. He was not crying now. He was a man who had clearly decided that the crying was finished, and was holding himself with the contained precision of someone reassembling after something large. But his eyes were red, and his jaw was set with the specific rigidity of controlled feeling. And when he looked across the yard at Amelia, he looked at her, the way a man looks at someone he already knows matters, even before he understands why. Walter said something to him quietly. Nathaniel nodded. They walked toward the house together. Amelia set down her trowel for the second time that morning and went to meet them. "Mrs. Carter," Nathaniel said when they were close enough. His voice was steady. "My father has told me what you did. Taking him in. The documents. All of it." He stopped. He seemed to be choosing his next words with the care of a man who has learned that the words he chooses tend to matter. "I don't know how to thank you adequately." "You don't need to thank me," Amelia said. "He fixed my porch step and helped with the barn and taught my daughter calculus. We're square." Something moved in Nathaniel's face. Not quite a smile, something more complicated than a smile, the expression of a man recalibrating what he expected to find here against what was actually in front of him. "He mentioned the calculus," he said. "She's fast," Walter said from beside him. "She is." Amelia agreed. She looked between them, the son with the father's eyes, and the father with the son's posture. Both of them carrying the same particular brand of contained feeling that she suspected was a Whitaker family trait passed down through generations of men who felt everything and showed precisely as much as they decided to show. "Come inside, I'll make coffee." She made coffee. Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she and Walter had gone through documents by lamplight, where the letter to Denver had been read, where Lillian had been doing calculus at 6 in the morning. Nathaniel sat in the chair that had become without anyone deciding it. Walter's chair. And Walter sat in the chair that was Amelia's, and Amelia stood at the stove and listened to the shape of the silence between the two men, and understood that they were not done. That 40 minutes in the barn had opened something but not resolved it, and that the resolution was going to take longer than a morning. She put 3 cups on the table and sat down. "Tell me about Whitmore," Nathaniel said. He was looking at the Denver letter, which was still on the table where she had left it. He had clearly already read it. Walter must have brought it to the barn. His expression reading it now was the expression of a man for whom this kind of document fraud is not abstract but professionally concrete, who has seen this pattern before and knows exactly what it means and what it costs. "He's a land developer out of Denver," Amelia said. "He came in June. He's been acquiring properties across this valley at a fraction of their value, some through direct purchase of owners who are desperate, some through legal challenges based on documents that have been altered by a county clerk named Pruitt." "How many properties?" 3 confirmed, including the alteration in my deed. 2 more families, I believe, have been affected, but haven't yet been served. And the judge in Pueblo, my father mentioned him. Judge Harmon. Walter wrote to him. We're planning to go Friday. Nathaniel looked at his father. Walter said nothing, but held his son's gaze with the steadiness of a man who is allowing himself to be looked at fully, which is a different thing from simply being seen. "You can't go to Pueblo Friday," Nathaniel said. He said it to Amelia, not to Walter. "Whitmore's lawyer filed a formal restriction notice on your creek access this morning. I stopped at the county office on my way through town because my father's letter mentioned the notation issue, and I wanted to see the current filing status." He set his hand on the table. "The restriction is effective immediately. You have 30 days to contest it before it becomes permanent." The room went very still. Amelia felt the cold move through her. Not the fear cold this time, but the anger cold, which was different, which was clarifying in a way that fear never was. Whitmore had moved faster than they expected. He had seen her refuse twice, and he had recalibrated, and he had stopped waiting. 30 days, she said. Yes. My tax deadline is in 34 days. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something in it sharpened. He knows that. Yes, Amelia said. He does. She was quiet for a moment, thinking through the geometry of it, the 30 days and the 34 days and the creek access and the harvest and the $63 and Pruitt and the Denver evidence and Judge Harmon and what it all added up to if she arranged it correctly and what it cost if she arranged it wrong. What does he actually want? Nathaniel said. He was asking her, but she understood he was also testing her understanding how clearly she saw the situation. He wants me gone, she said. Not the land specifically, there are easier properties. He wants me gone because I refused publicly, and I'm still here, and I've been talking to people, and he knows I know something is wrong with the county records. Leaving me in place is a liability for him. She looked at Nathaniel directly. He needs this valley cleared by fall so he can present the assembled land package to whoever is financing him. One holdout ruins the picture. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Who is financing him? He said. I don't know. I might. He reached into the jacket he had laid over the back of his chair and produced a folded paper. Set it on the table between them. There's a land consolidation venture being capitalized through 3 investment houses on the eastern seaboard. I've seen the prospectus. It came across my desk in May, and I passed on it because the underlying land acquisition strategy was aggressive. He paused. Whitmore's name isn't in the prospectus, but the geographic profile matches this valley exactly. Walter's hand came down flat on the table. Not a dramatic gesture. The controlled, definitive gesture of a man who has just connected 2 things and does not like what they connect to. Who is listed in the prospectus? A company called Western Territorial Holdings. Nathaniel held his father's gaze. Incorporated in Delaware. 3 principals. One of them is a man named Cross, Elias Cross. Walter was absolutely still. You know that name, Amelia said, watching him. Yes. His voice was very controlled. Elias Cross is a man I did significant business with in the 1870s. He is also a man I had cause to refuse a particular transaction in 1882, and who responded to that refusal by attempting unsuccessfully to undermine my company's standing with 2 of our largest clients. He looked at Nathaniel. He was behind the railroad bond dispute in '84. I remember the '84 dispute, Nathaniel said quietly. I was 22. It was the year you stopped coming home for dinner. The sentence landed in the room like something physical. Walter absorbed it without moving. Nathaniel had not said it as an accusation. He had said it as a fact. The way people state facts that have been stored for a long time and are finally being allowed out. But it carried in its plain factual weight everything that had been sitting between them for 3 years. Amelia looked at the table. Cross knows who I am, Walter said. If he is behind this venture and he learns I am connected to this property in any way, it will change the nature of the situation considerably. Change it how? Amelia said. It will make it personal for him in a way that purely financial disputes are not personal. He will be more aggressive. He will move faster. A pause. But it also gives us something we wouldn't otherwise have. What? A reason. Walter looked at her. Elias Cross has been building this venture for 2 years. He needs this land package complete by October, or his Eastern financing evaporates. If I am present and visible and using my name, if he believes I am actively working against his interests, he will panic. Panicked men make mistakes. You're talking about drawing him out, Nathaniel said. Yes. That's dangerous. Yes, Walter agreed. It is. Nathaniel looked at his father for a long moment. The look of a son reading a father he has not been able to read clearly for 3 years, trying to find in the familiar face. Whatever has changed, whatever has survived, whether the man he knew and the man in front of him are still the same person, or have become strangers while wearing the same face. I'll go to Pueblo, Nathaniel said. He said it to Amelia. Today, not Friday. I'll bring the Denver letter and the restriction notice, and I'll talk to Judge Harmon directly. I know how to talk to judges. You don't know Harmon, Walter said. I know his type. Nathaniel said it without arrogance, simply with the calm of a man who has spent 20 years in rooms where these conversations happen and knows the terrain. And I know how to present a fraud case. This is clean, father. The Denver record is unambiguous. Pruitt altered a filed document. That's criminal, not civil. There's the matter of proof of Pruitt's connection to Whitmore, Amelia said. Mr. Garrett, Walter said. He watched the transactions. He's frightened, but he's angry, and angry men with first-hand knowledge are more useful than reluctant witnesses. I'll talk to Garrett on my way out of town, Nathaniel said. He was already thinking forward. She could see it the way the conversation had shifted from emotional to strategic. In the space of 60 seconds, the way certain kinds of men pivot naturally and without effort between the two modes. Mrs. Carter, do you trust Garrett? He told Walter what he knew without being asked to. That's more than most people in this valley have been willing to do. Good enough. Nathaniel pushed back his chair, then stopped, looked at his father. Will you be here when I get back? It was the simplest question in the room and the most complicated one. Walter looked at his son. Yes, he said. I'll be here. Nathaniel held that for a moment, nodded once. The nod of a man who is choosing to believe something he has not yet fully been given reason to believe, which is the only way certain kinds of belief ever start. He left within the hour. The house felt different after he was gone, not quieter. Lillian had come home from school and was at the table with her calculus book, and Walter was on the porch, and the ordinary sounds of the farm continued as they always did. But the shape of the day had changed. Something had been set in motion that was moving now under its own momentum, and Amelia was aware of the strange, simultaneous relief and terror of that. The relief of no longer being the only one pushing, the terror of not being entirely in control of where it went. She sat on the porch steps that evening with Walter after Lillian was in bed. Tell me about Cross, she said. Walter was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means sorting, not reluctance. He is a man who has always understood money as a weapon rather than a tool. He is intelligent and patient, and he does not forgive slights. In 1882, I refused to participate in a bond scheme he was constructing because the scheme involved misrepresenting the condition of certain rail lines to investors who did not have the resources to absorb the loss when the truth emerged. He called it business. I called it theft from people who couldn't protect themselves. He paused. He has evidently continued to refine the approach. She looked at the road white in the moonlight. Why did he choose this valley? Location, water rights. The topography makes it ideal for a particular kind of rail spur that's been planned for western Colorado for a decade. Whoever holds this land, when that spur goes in, will profit enormously. He looked at her steadily. Your farm sits on the best water access in the valley, Amelia. That's not coincidence. That's why Whitmore came to you first and has been most persistent with you. She absorbed this. I thought it was stubbornness, that I'd said no and he didn't like it. That too. But the stubbornness is secondary. The creek is primary. She let that settle. The creek that Thomas had chosen when they filed the homestead claim, standing on the edge of the property with his hand shading his eyes and saying, "This is right. This water access will matter in dry years," thinking about drought and crops and future summers he hadn't known he wouldn't see. Thomas being careful again in ways that were still protecting her years after he was gone. She felt the usual complicated press of grief and gratitude and willed it quiet. Walter, she said. When Nathaniel goes to Harmon, if Harmon moves on, Pruitt Cross will know immediately. Whitmore will know. What do? They accelerate. What does that mean specifically? It means they stop using legal process as a primary tool and start using it as a weapon of last resort. It means pressure, possibly direct pressure. He said the last part carefully, the way you say a thing you want the person to understand without frightening them past the point of clear thinking. She understood it perfectly. She wasn't frightened past clear thinking. How direct? I don't know exactly. Cross is not a man who dirties his own hands, but he employs men who will. She nodded slowly. She looked at the barn, the house, the road. at all the things she had been defending for 2 years before she even knew what she was defending them against. "Then we move faster than they do," she said. "Yes," Walter said. "We do." I was looking at her with an expression she had seen once before and filed away without examining the night she had told him to write the letter, regardless of whether Nathaniel came. The expression of a man who is surprised, still after everything, to find someone who does not flinch. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He looked back at the road. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" A pause. "Myself. 20 years ago, before I forgot what it looked like." She didn't answer that. She let it sit between them in the dark, where it was honest and where it didn't require anything of either of them, and that was enough. Nathaniel came back the following evening. He had gone to Pueblo, and he had spoken with Judge Harmon, and he had spoken with Garrett, and he came back looking like a man who has done a great deal of work very fast, and is running on the particular energy of someone who has found a problem that his specific capabilities are exactly suited to solve. He sat down at the kitchen table and spread his papers and talked for 20 minutes without stopping. Harmon had received Walter's letter. He had been watching the county record situation in the valley with the specific wariness of a judge who has seen this pattern before in other counties and knows what it looks like before it fully materializes. He had been waiting for someone to bring him a provable case. The Denver letter was the provable case. He was issuing a preservation order on all active land filings in Red Creek County, effective immediately, which meant Whitmore's lawyers could not legally advance any claim based on current county records until the records had been independently audited. It bought them time, real time, not 30 days, potentially 60 or 90. Garrett had agreed to make a formal statement. He had, it emerged, been keeping his own record of Pruitt's alterations in a small notebook that he kept in the lining of his coat, because he had known since June that this day would come, and he wanted to be ready for it. The notebook named dates, specific filings, and twice mentioned overhearing conversations between Pruitt and a man fitting Whitmore's description. It was better than they had expected. Walter listened to all of it without speaking. When Nathaniel finished, he said, "Harmon will need to move on Pruitt before Whitmore can reach him. Harmon knows that. He has a county marshal he trusts. Pruitt will be questioned tomorrow morning. And Whitmore. Whitmore will know something is wrong the moment Pruitt goes silent. He has people watching." Nathaniel looked at his father. "Which means tomorrow afternoon at the latest he comes here." The table went quiet. Amelia looked between them. "Let him come," she said. Both men looked at her. "He's going to come regardless," she said. "We can't stop that. The question is whether he comes while we're reacting to him or while we're ready for him." She looked at Nathaniel. "What exactly did Harmon's preservation order cover?" "All active filings, including the restriction notice on your creek access." "So the restriction is suspended?" "Until the audit is complete." "Then I can irrigate tomorrow?" "Yes." "Good." She straightened. "Then tomorrow morning I irrigate and I work and I do what I do every day, and when Whitmore comes, he finds me exactly where he expects to find me, doing exactly what he thinks he's already prevented me from doing." She paused. "And he finds the two of you here." Nathaniel looked at Walter. Walter looked at Nathaniel. Something passed between them, the first thing she had seen pass between them, that didn't carry the weight of what had been broken. That was instead simply the quick, fluid communication of two people who think similarly and recognize it. "He won't know who I am immediately," Nathaniel said. "He knows the Whitaker name, but he may not know my face." "He will," Walter said quietly. "Cross will have briefed him. The moment I became visible in this situation, the moment I spoke to Garrett in town, Cross's people would have been watching. They know who I am. Whitmore will know who Nathaniel is." "Then the element of surprise is already gone." "The element of surprise, yes, but not the element of position." Walter looked at Amelia. "Cross and Whitmore expected to find a widow alone. They found a widow with a defensible legal position, a provable fraud case, a judge's preservation order, and—" He stopped. "And two men who know how this works from the inside," Nathaniel finished. "Yes." Amelia nodded. She was thinking again through the shape of tomorrow, through the move and the counter-move, through the thing they had and the thing Whitmore had, and what the ground looked like between them. "There's one more thing we need," she said. "What?" Nathaniel said. "The other families. The ones Whitmore's already displaced or is threatening. They need to know what Harmon's order means. They need to know there's a case being built and that they're part of it. That's asking people to stand up against a man who's already shown he'll use legal force against them," Nathaniel said. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "I know what I'm asking." Gaze. "Mrs. Carter, do you understand that if Cross believes this case is going to expose his operation, he will not simply fight it legally, he will do whatever is necessary to make it go away, including going after the people who are standing up?" "I understand that. You're not afraid of that." "I'm afraid of it," she said plainly. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if we leave those families out of this. Harmon's order protects the filings. It doesn't protect people who don't know they're being protected. And if Whitmore can't get to me, he'll go harder at whoever is more vulnerable." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at his father with an expression that was new, not the careful, managed expression of the past 24 hours, but something simpler, something that looked like recognition. "She's right," Walter said. He said it quietly and without any emphasis because it didn't need any. "I know she is," Nathaniel said. He looked back at Amelia. "I'll ride out to the Brevin property tonight and the Kellermans tomorrow morning. You should talk to Mrs. Doyle. She knows everyone in this valley, and they'll trust her word." "I'll go to her first thing." Nathaniel stood, began sorting his papers, then stopped, looked at her. "One question. Not about the legal situation." She waited. "My father has been here almost 4 weeks." He said it carefully. "In that time, he has apparently fixed your porch, repaired your barn, taught your daughter calculus, reviewed your land documents, and written the most coherent letter I have ever received from him in my adult life." A pause. "What did you do to him?" Amelia considered the question for a moment. "Fed him," she said. "Talked to him like a person. Let him be useful." She paused. "Told him to write the letter." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. He said it differently from how he'd said it that morning. That morning, it had been the formal gratitude of a son, acknowledging something done for his father. This was something else, more direct, more personal. The gratitude of a man who got his father back and is still in the first 24 hours of understanding what that means. She nodded. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long." He almost smiled. The same almost smile as his father. It was remarkable how thoroughly a thing could be inherited. "Yes, ma'am," he said, which was the first time he'd said that, and which landed with a warmth she hadn't expected. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought through the morning. The irrigation first before the heat, then Mrs. Doyle, then home and whatever came after that. She thought about Whitmore arriving, about what his face would look like when he found the preservation order was in effect, and Pruitt had been questioned, and there were witnesses and documents and 2 Whitaker men standing in her yard. She thought about Cross somewhere far away, receiving the news that his carefully assembled land scheme was fracturing at the edges. She thought about Thomas. She sent him the sentence she had been forming for days. "We're going to be all right. I think we're actually going to be all right." She believed it. In the stubborn, unverifiable way she believed the important things. She was almost asleep when she heard it. It was not a dramatic sound. A creak outside, the kind a person makes on dry ground when they are moving quietly, but not quietly enough. Then another. Then nothing. She lay still. The third sound was different, harder. Glass, specifically the specific sound of a bottle hitting the side of a wooden structure and shattering. Then the smell. Sharp mineral, immediately unmistakable to anyone who had grown up around mines and the things that powered them. Coal oil. Amelia was out of bed before the thought finished forming. Bare feet on the floor, moving fast, door hallway. Lillian first. She pushed open her daughter's door, and the girl was already sitting up, eyes wide, nose working. "Mama. With me. Now. Don't stop moving." She had Lillian's hand, and was moving toward the back of the house away from the smell's direction, which was the west side, the barn side. She could hear it now, under the night sounds, the specific soft roar of something catching and beginning. She got them out the back door and into the yard and turned. The barn was not yet fully alight. One wall, the west wall, was burning at the base, the fire moving upward with the unhurried confidence of something that has been given enough fuel and time. The horses. She heard them, the specific panicked sound that horses make that is different from every other sound in the world. She moved. Walter was already there. She didn't know how he had been in the sewing room, which was on the east side farthest from the fire, but he was already at the barn door, already pulling it open, already inside in the smoke and the noise, and she was right behind him before she made the decision to be there. And together they got the first horse out. Then the second. Both of them wild-eyed and shaking, and needing to be held and moved with force. And the fire was moving faster now, and the heat was a physical weight against her face. Nathaniel came from the direction of the yard at a run, and she didn't have time to wonder where he'd been sleeping, because he went straight to the second horse that Walter was fighting to control, got it by the halter with both hands, and pulled it out of the barn and into the night air. "Is that everything?" Nathaniel shouted. "The tack," Walter said, and went back in. "Walter," Amelia started. I was already inside. She went in after him and pulled the saddle from the rack and came back out coughing, and Walter came out behind her with the harness over his shoulder and his face black with smoke, and they stood in the yard with the horses and the heat and the red light of the fire on all their faces and watched the west wall of the barn burn. Lillian was at the fence with both hands gripping the rail, watching with wide, steady eyes and making no sound. Amelia got to her and put her arm around her and held her tight. "Is everyone?" Lillian started. "Everyone is out," Amelia said. "Animals too." The fire was going to take the wall, possibly the roof. It was not going to take the house. The house was far enough, the night was still enough, and 3 people who knew what they were doing were not going to let it cross the yard. They fought it with water and dirt for 2 hours. When it was over, the west wall was gone. The roof had partially survived. The structure was damaged, but standing. The horses were in the yard, calmed now, but still blowing hard. They stood in the gray pre-dawn and looked at what remained. Nathaniel's face was utterly still, with a cold fury. Amelia recognized immediately as his father's anger, the same quality, the same containment, the kind of fury that makes no noise because it doesn't need to. "This was a message," he said. "Yes," Walter said. "Cross." Or Whitmore on Cross's instruction. Walter looked at the barn. "They know the legal situation is changing. They're telling us the cost of continuing." Amelia looked at what was left of the wall Thomas had built. She felt the anger move through her the way it always moved, clean and cold and clarifying. "Then they've made a mistake," she said. Both men looked at her. "Before today," she said, "Harmon had a fraud case. A clean one, a good one, but a civil case about altered documents." She looked at Nathaniel. "What is it now?" Nathaniel's jaw was set. "Criminal arson. Attempted destruction of property. Potentially attempted harm to persons." A pause. "Depending on what we can prove about who ordered it. Then they've just handed us everything we needed to take this from a county court proceeding to a criminal case." She looked at the burned wall. At the handprint in the cement of the back step, barely visible in the first gray light. At the house where Lillian had learned to walk, and Thomas had driven the last nail, and where she had survived 2 years alone, and was not done surviving yet. And they did it in a way that makes every person in this valley understand exactly what kind of men they're dealing with. She turned to face them both. "Go get some sleep," she said. 2 hours. Then we start again." Neither of them moved immediately. They looked at her, the woman standing in the gray light in front of her half-burned barn with black smoke on her face and bare feet in the ash-gray dirt, and the absolute unbroken certainty in her eyes of someone who has decided that this right here is exactly where she stands. Nathaniel said very quietly, "Yes, ma'am." Walter said nothing, but the way he looked at her said everything that needed saying. The 2 hours came and went, and nobody actually slept. Amelia knew this because she didn't sleep herself, and she could hear the quiet movements of both men in the house. Walter in the kitchen before the light came. Nathaniel on the porch with paper and his pen. Both of them doing what people do when sleep is impossible and the mind won't stop working through the problem. She lay on her bed for the full 2 hours with her eyes open and ran the situation forward in her mind, the way Thomas used to run tunnel maps, tracing the passages, finding the weak points, marking where the rock was solid and where it was not. What they had: Harmon's preservation order, the Denver letter, Garrett's notebook, 2 witnesses who could place Pruitt in conversation with Whitmore's people, a criminal arson that had happened on her property with 3 living people who had seen the fire start and could testify to the direction and nature of it. What they didn't have: direct connection between the arson and either Whitmore or Cross. A name for whoever had actually thrown the bottle. Time. She was dressed and in the kitchen before first light. Walter was already there. Coffee made. He set a cup in front of her without being asked and sat down across from her, and they looked at each other in the dark before the lamp was necessary, and neither of them said anything for a full minute, which was the kind of silence that had become over 4 weeks a language of its own. "You should have let me go back in for the tack," she said. "You got the saddle. You went back for the harness when the roof was already going." "The harness was Thomas's," he said simply. She looked at him. He looked back. She picked up her coffee and didn't say anything further about it, because there was nothing further to say. A man who understood that a dead husband's harness was not equipment, but memory, that was not something you responded to with words. Nathaniel came in from the porch with his papers under his arm and sat down and accepted coffee and looked at both of them with the specific, focused energy of a man who has made several decisions overnight and is ready to move. "I've been writing out the criminal complaint," he said. "Arson of an occupied dwelling. That's the charge. 3 witnesses, all 3 of us, to the fire starting from the outside on the west wall. The bottle. The smell of coal oil before ignition." He set the papers on the table. "This changes the jurisdiction. Harmon handles civil land disputes. Arson on an occupied dwelling goes to the federal marshal." "There's a federal marshal in Pueblo," Walter said. "I know. I'm going back to Pueblo this morning." Nathaniel looked at Amelia. "Both things simultaneously. Harmon on the fraud case, the marshal on the arson. We don't let them separate the charges and fight them one at a time. We hit Whitmore and Cross on 2 fronts at once." Amelia nodded. "When you go to the marshal, use Walter's name. Use it fully. I know you've been cautious about it." "No," Nathaniel said. He said it quietly but without hesitation. "No more caution. Father's name opens doors that nothing else does. We use it." He looked at Walter. "If that's acceptable." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's acceptable." The word carried more weight than it appeared to. Amelia watched Nathaniel receive it and understood that what had just happened was not simply a tactical decision. It was the first time, possibly in years, that Nathaniel had asked his father's permission for something and received it directly, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was going to name it out loud, but it was real, and it was there. "I'll go to Mrs. Doyle this morning," Amelia said. "And then the Brevins and the Garners. People need to know the preservation order is in effect, and the case is moving. They need to know that standing up now is safer than they thought yesterday." "And Whitmore," Walter said. "He'll come today, once he knows Pruitt has been questioned and the restriction notice is suspended." "Let him come," Amelia said, for the second time, with the same certainty as the first. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Carter, what is your plan for when he arrives?" She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I'm going to let him talk. Men like Whitmore always talk too much when they're frightened and trying not to show it. And then I'm going to tell him very calmly exactly what we have and what's been filed and what's coming. Not to negotiate, not to threaten, just to make sure he understands that the ground has changed under him." She paused. "And you," she said to Walter, "are going to be standing right there." Walter looked at her with that expression again, the one she had stopped pretending not to see. "Yes," he said. "I am." Nathaniel left by 7. He rode hard, and they both knew it, because they could hear the pace of the horse on the dry road, urgent and purposeful, and then the sound faded, and the morning settled into the particular quiet of a day that has a great deal in it and has not yet begun. Amelia went to Mrs. Doyle first. She told her everything. Not the parts she'd been careful about before everything. Walter's identity. Nathaniel, the Denver letter. Garrett's notebook. Harmon's order, the arson. All of it laid out at Martha Doyle's kitchen table in plain language, while the older woman sat very still and listened with the focused attention of a person who has been waiting for someone to tell them the truth for a long time. When Amelia finished, Mrs. Doyle was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know 6 families who need to hear this today." "I was hoping you'd say that." "I'll go this morning, before noon." She stood up with the decision of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and was not frightened by men with money. "Amelia, the old man Walter, you trust him?" "Yes." "With the farm, or with more than that?" Amelia looked at her steadily. "Martha." "I'm old, not blind." "The farm," Amelia said. "That's what's at stake right now. That's what I'm thinking about." Mrs. Doyle looked at her in the specific way of a woman who knows exactly what she's hearing and what she is not hearing. All right, she said. "Go do what you need to do. I'll take care of the families." Amelia went to the Brevins next, then the Garners. The Brevins were a family of 5 husband and wife and 3 children who had received their legal notice 2 weeks ago and had been existing since, in the particular suspended terror of people who have been told their home is being taken and don't know how to stop it. Marcus Brevin met her at the door with the face of a man who had stopped sleeping and started waiting. When she explained Harmon's preservation order and what it meant, his wife appeared behind him, and when she understood that the restriction was suspended and the county records were frozen, she put both hands over her mouth and her shoulders moved. "We don't have to go," she said, around her hands, trying to make it real. "Not today," Amelia said. "Not while this case is moving. But I need Marcus to be willing to talk to Harmon about what was done to your title. His testimony, plus Garrett's notebook, is the difference between a provable case and a strong one." Marcus Brevin looked at his wife. She took her hands from her mouth, nodded once. "I'll talk to whoever needs talking to," he said. She got home by mid-morning. Walter was in the yard assessing the barn damage in the daylight with the systematic eye of a man who is already calculating what it would take to rebuild. He looked up when she came through the gate. "Brevin," he said. "He'll testify." She came to stand beside him and looked at the burned wall. In the daylight, it was simultaneously better and worse than it had looked in the dark better, because the structure had survived worse, because the full extent of what had burned was visible. Now the gap in the wall like a missing tooth. The blackened timber ends the smell that didn't go away in daylight only became more specific. "The wall can be rebuilt," Walter said. "I know. Nathaniel will want to. He doesn't get to pay for it," Amelia said. Not sharply, just clearly. "Not as a gift. If he wants to be involved, we work out an arrangement that makes sense. But he doesn't just pay for it." Walter looked at her. "He'll argue." "He can argue. He'll be wrong." Something moved in Walter's face that she was starting to understand was his version of a smile, the contained, restrained inward version of one. "You two are going to be interesting," he said. "Don't start," she said, and went into the house. Whitmore came at noon. He came alone this time, which told her everything she needed to know about his state of mind. When Whitmore brought lawyers, he was negotiating. When he brought Aldrich, he was threatening through proxies. When he came alone, he was either trying to appear reasonable, or he was genuinely frightened and had decided that whatever conversation needed to happen should happen without witnesses. She was on the porch when the carriage stopped. Walter was in the yard between the house and the remains of the barn, apparently examining the structural damage. He did not look up immediately when the carriage arrived, which she knew was deliberate. Whitmore climbed down and looked at the burned barn wall, and then at Amelia, and then at Walter, and his face did a series of rapid recalculations. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I heard about the fire. I'm terribly sorry. Do you have any idea what caused it?" "Coal oil and a glass bottle thrown against the west wall by someone who'd been watching the property," she said. "Around 2 in the morning. The word terribly sorry stayed on his face like something painted on, not connected to anything underneath. "That's dreadful. Do you have any idea who—" "No," she said. "Not yet. The federal marshal in Pueblo is looking into it. A beat, brief but real. The federal marshal. Yes, my guest's son filed the criminal complaint this morning. She paused. You may have heard Walter Whitaker has been staying here. His son Nathaniel came out from New York. He was here last night when the fire started. Between the three of us, we have a fairly complete account of events for the marshal. She kept her voice entirely pleasant, the way she would speak to anyone who had come to pay a neighborly call. Would you like coffee? It's hot. Whitmore looked at Walter, who had straightened and was now looking at him directly. The look Amelia had first seen on her porch 3 weeks ago, still cold, the look of a man measuring the exact weight of a problem he has already begun solving. I know who you are, Whitmore said to Walter. His voice had changed. The measured reasonableness was still there, but underneath it something tighter. Yes, Walter said. I expect Cross told you. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. The ripples were visible on Whitmore's face before he got himself back under control. Elias Cross is an investor in a legitimate land development venture, he began. With falsified county records, Amelia said pleasantly. And a clerk named Pruitt, who has been making alterations to filed documents for the past 4 months, and who was questioned by Judge Harmon's office yesterday morning. She tilted her head. I'm sure you heard about that too. Whitmore looked at her. The smile was gone. Underneath it was the face she had been waiting to see since the first morning he came to her door. The real face, the one that hadn't needed to be anything but what it was, because it had always had power, and power is the only mask some men ever learn to wear. Mrs. Carter, he said in a different voice. Not threatening, that would have been less frightening, simply flat and certain, the voice of a man making an assessment. You have some legal maneuvering in progress, I understand that. But you should be aware that what you're dealing with is considerably larger than a county judge and a complaint about survey notations. There are substantial financial interests at stake that do not respond well to interference. I know, she said. I know exactly how substantial. I've seen the prospectus. He went still. Western Territorial Holdings, she said. Delaware Incorporation, 3 principals. October financing deadline. She looked at him steadily. I know what this valley is worth when the rail spur goes in. I know why my creek access matters specifically. I know all of it, Mr. Whitmore. So when you say there are substantial financial interests that don't respond well to interference, I want you to understand that I am fully aware of the size of the thing I'm interfering with. She let that sit for a moment. And I'm still standing here, she said. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment, then at Walter, then back at her. This isn't finished, he said quietly. No, she agreed. It isn't. But the shape of it has changed considerably since you were last here. She paused. You might want to have that conversation with Cross before you make any more decisions. Tell him Walter Whitaker is involved. Tell him the federal arson case is open. Tell him Judge Harmon has the Denver records and Garrett's notebook, and the testimony of 3 families whose documents were altered. She looked at him with the steady, direct gaze she used for difficult things. And then ask him whether October is still realistic. Whitmore held her gaze for 5 more seconds. Then he turned and got back in his carriage and drove away without another word. Walter came to stand beside her on the porch. They watched the carriage until it disappeared. He'll go to Cross directly, Walter said. I know. Cross will move fast. I know that too. She turned to go back inside. But he's moving from a position that's fracturing and we're moving from one that's getting stronger. There's a difference. She looked back at Walter over her shoulder. How fast can the West Wall be rebuilt? He considered. 2 weeks with the right materials and enough hands. Who do we know who has hands? He almost smiled. The real version this time. I believe Marcus Brevin owes us a conversation. She went inside and started lunch, and Walter came in behind her and set the table without being asked, and outside the half-burned barn stood in the noon light as evidence of exactly what they were up against and exactly what they had survived so far, which were 2 different things that together told the whole story. Nathaniel came back at 4 in the afternoon, and he came back fast. Amelia heard the horse on the road and went to the door and knew from the pace that something had happened, either very good or very bad, because that was the only explanation for that speed on a hot afternoon when any sensible person conserved their horse. He came through the gate still moving, and his face told her immediately good, but complicated. The expression of a man who has won something significant and discovered that the winning has immediately created a new problem. Marshal Connolly took the arson case, he said, stepping up onto the porch. Federal jurisdiction confirmed. He's sending 2 deputies to Red Creek tonight. He stopped. And Harmon has issued a subpoena for Elias Cross. Walter appeared in the doorway. He had heard. The 3 of them looked at each other. A subpoena for Cross, Walter said slowly. Harmon says the fraud case has Cross's fingerprints on it through the prospectus and through documented communications. Garrett witnessed between Pruitt and a man from Denver, who Garrett can now confirm from a photograph Nathaniel produced, was Cross's personal attorney. Nathaniel was still catching his breath slightly from the ride. Harmon wants Cross in his court in 14 days. Cross will fight the jurisdiction, Walter said. Harmon is prepared for that. Cross will apply pressure to Harmon personally. Harmon has been a judge for 22 years and has, by his own account, been pressured by better men than Cross and is still on the bench. Nathaniel looked at his father. He asked about you specifically. He asked if Walter Whitaker was willing to testify. The kitchen went very quiet. Amelia looked at Walter. Walter looked at the table. At the Denver letter still there, the evidence of an altered document and a clean original, and the specific distance between what was filed and what was true. He looked at it for a moment, with the expression of a man deciding something that he has actually already decided, and is simply taking the last few seconds to confirm. Yes, he said. I'm willing. He'll need a formal statement. He'll have it. Nathaniel looked at his father with something naked and unguarded moving in his face, the expression Amelia had seen in the barn doorway. The expression of a son looking at a father and trying to find the man he remembered inside the man who left. You understand what this means. Once you testify, Cross will come at you directly. He'll go after the company. He'll go after me. I know. The company can withstand it, Nathaniel said. We're solid, but it won't be clean. No, it won't be clean. Walter looked at his son. Nathaniel, I walked away from things that needed to be stood in front of. I am done walking away. The silence between them was the particular silence of something landing and being received and changing the shape of things between 2 people in a way that words, even good ones, couldn't fully carry. Lillian came in from the back of the house with her calculus book and stopped in the doorway and looked at the 3 adults with the serious, reading-the-room attention she always brought to a charged atmosphere. She looked at Walter specifically and said, "Did something good happen?" Walter looked at her, then actually smiled the full version, uncontained the smile of a man who has been storing it up for a long time. Yes, he said. Several things. Lillian considered this. Is the barn going to be fixed? Yes, Amelia said. The barn is going to be fixed. Can I help? You can hand nails. Mr. Walter said I could learn to use a hammer if you said it was all right. Amelia looked at Walter. He looked back with the expression of a man who has been making small, quiet promises to her daughter and does not particularly regret any of them. We'll discuss the hammer, she said. That evening, while Nathaniel worked on Walter's formal statement at the kitchen table, and Walter himself sat beside him, reviewing what he said for precision, Amelia went out to the yard alone. She stood with her back to the house and faced the burned barn wall in the fading light, and let herself feel for a few minutes all the things she had been managing and compartmentalizing and setting aside in order to keep moving. She felt the fear. She let it be real for a moment, the specific fear of a woman who has been living 1 step ahead of disaster for 2 years and is now 3 steps deep into a battle with men who have already demonstrated they will set fire to her barn while her child is sleeping inside. She felt the grief. Thomas, who would have known what to do with all of this, and who would have done it quietly and carefully, and with the particular confidence of a man who understood how things worked. Thomas, whose harness Walter had gone back into a burning barn to save because he understood that it was not a harness. She felt the exhaustion. Deep and real, the kind that lives in the bones and doesn't lift with a night's sleep. And then she felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not the forced determination of survival. Not the mechanical forward motion of a woman who has no choice but to keep going. Something more like the actual desire to win. Not just to survive. To win. To take this thing that Whitmore and Cross had built and dismantle it the same way they had tried to dismantle her through documentation and legal process, and the specific power of being right and being willing to prove it. She wanted to win. For Thomas's land and Lillian's future, and the Brevin family, and the Garner family, and old Mr. Garrett with his notebook and his coat lining, and every struggling family in this valley that had been systematically targeted because powerful men had calculated they were too weak and too alone to fight back. She was not alone. She turned around and went back inside. The next 10 days were the most intense of Amelia Carter's life, including the weeks after Thomas died, because grief had a single direction. But this had a dozen simultaneous moving parts, and every one of them required attention. Nathaniel worked the legal case from Amelia's kitchen table with the focused efficiency of a man in his natural element. He communicated daily with Harmon's office, and with Marshall Connolly, and with 3 lawyers in Denver, who he retained through the Whitaker firm. He was meticulous and fast, and occasionally ate meals that Amelia left at his elbow without apparently noticing he was eating them. Walter provided testimony and documents, and twice made the ride to Pueblo himself to speak with Harmon directly about the technical aspects of the financial fraud that were too specific and too complex to be conveyed through written statements. He came back from the second trip with something different in his posture. Not relief exactly, but the particular quality of a man who is doing what he is built to do after a long period of doing other things. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. And somewhere in the weeks of barn repairs and calculus lessons and quiet evenings, he had found his way back to being able to use it. The barn wall went up in a week. Marcus Brevin came the first day with his 2 oldest sons, and they worked through the heat without complaint, because working on Amelia Carter's barn was also working on their own future, and everyone understood that, and nobody needed to say it. Mr. Garrett came the second day. 2 men from the east end of the valley, whose names Amelia barely knew, came the third day, because Mrs. Doyle had talked to their wives, and their wives had talked to them, and that was how things moved in a valley where people had finally decided to move together. Nathaniel tried to pay for the lumber. Amelia refused. They argued about it on the second morning of construction in the yard, in voices low enough that the men working couldn't hear them, and Nathaniel had the specific experience of discovering what it felt like to disagree with someone who was not going to be moved and who made better arguments than he did. "This is my farm," she said. "The lumber for my barn is my responsibility. You don't have the money. I'll have it. I have the tax payment coming from the Hendersons for the harvest help, and Mrs. Doyle is lending me the rest against the spring crop. It's handled." "It doesn't need to be handled that way when—" "Nathaniel." She looked at him directly. "I understand that you come from a world where money solves problems, and the solving is the point. That is not my world. In my world, how you solve a problem matters as much as solving it. This farm stays mine in every sense of the word, or there is no point in keeping it." She paused. "Do you understand that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, quietly. "I understand that." "Good." She turned back to the construction. "You can buy the nails." He bought a great many nails. She let that stand. On the 9th day, 2 things happened within 4 hours of each other that changed everything. The first was a telegram. It arrived at the postal office, and Mrs. Doyle brought it out personally because she knew what it was about, and because she had apparently decided that being 71 and having a horse entitled her to deliver important news at a pace of her choosing. The telegram was from Harmon's office. Pruitt had made a full confession. Under question with the criminal fraud charge in front of him, and Garrett's notebook as evidence. Gerald Pruitt had named Whitmore directly, had named Cross's attorney as the intermediary, and had produced from a locked box in his own home copies of the specific instructions he had received for each alteration. Written instructions on paper in handwriting that Nathaniel identified immediately as belonging to a man he had seen sign documents in New York. The case was no longer about a county land dispute. The case was a criminal conspiracy with documentary evidence. The second thing happened at 2 in the afternoon, when a carriage Amelia didn't recognize came down the road from the direction of Denver. Not Whitmore's black lacquer carriage. Something different. Something larger and more expensive, and stopped at her gate. The man who stepped out was not Whitmore. He was older, leaner, with the particular stillness of a man who has spent a long time learning to control the space around him. He looked at the farmhouse, and at the repaired barn, and at the people working in the yard, and then his eyes found Walter, and stopped. Walter saw him at the same moment. He went absolutely still. The man at the gate said clearly enough to carry across the yard, "Hello, Walter." And Walter said in a voice Amelia had never heard from him before, stripped of all the careful management, all the deliberate control, something older and harder, underneath Elias. Elias Cross had come himself. Amelia set down the nail she was holding. Beside her, Marcus Brevin had also gone still, his hammer lowered, watching. The two men from the East Valley had stopped working. Everyone in the yard was looking at the gate. Nathaniel came out of the house. He saw Cross and stopped in the doorway, and his face went through several things very fast before it arrived at the same contained cold fury she had seen the morning after the fire. Cross did not look at Nathaniel. He kept his eyes on Walter. "I think we should talk," he said. "Yes," Walter said. He did not move toward him. "We should. Privately." "No," Amelia said. Cross looked at her for the first time. The look of a man encountering something he had previously considered only as an abstraction. The widow with the farm, the obstacle in the land package, and finding it considerably more concrete than expected. "Mrs. Carter," Walter said without looking away from Cross. "This is my conversation to have." "It's my property he's standing on," she said. She walked toward the gate. She was aware of every person in the yard watching her do it. Brevin Garrett's nephews, who had come to help with the roof, Nathaniel frozen in the doorway. She was aware of the weight of the last 4 weeks in her legs and her hands and the back of her neck where the sun hit. She walked to the gate and stopped and looked at Elias Cross from 3 feet away. He was up close, a man who had learned to make his stillness feel like power. It was a particular skill. She had seen it in Whitmore, less refined. In Cross it was polished and old and very practiced. "Mr. Cross," she said, "whatever you came to say to Walter, you can say in front of the people standing in this yard. Because these are the people whose land you've been trying to steal, and they have the right to hear what a man who has built his fortune doing it looks like when he's run out of road." A silence. Cross looked at her, at Walter, at Nathaniel in the doorway, at the burned west wall of the barn, repaired now, but still carrying the discoloration of the fire visible if you knew what you were looking at. And then, and it was the thing she had not expected, the thing that told her more than anything else that had happened exactly where they stood. He looked back at her, and something in his face changed. Not defeat. Not quite. Something before defeat. The expression of a man doing precise mental arithmetic and arriving at a number he doesn't like. "The subpoena," he said. 14 days, she said. "Judge Harmon." "I have lawyers. So does Nathaniel. Better ones, I'd wager." She held his gaze. "And we have Pruitt's written confession, and the original Denver records, and Garrett's notebook, and the federal arson case, and the testimony of 4 families in this valley." She paused. "What do you have, Mr. Cross?" The silence this time was the longest one of the whole fight. Behind her she could hear Brevin shift his weight. She could hear someone in the yard let out a breath very slowly. Cross looked at Walter. "Is this what you've built here?" he said. Something in his tone that was not quite a question. "No," Walter said. He stepped forward until he was standing beside Amelia, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. "This is what she built. I just had the sense to help when she let me." Cross looked between them. Did his arithmetic one more time. Came to his number. "I want to discuss terms," he said, and Nathaniel Whitaker walked off the porch and across the yard and came to stand on Amelia's other side, and he said in the quiet, definitive voice of a man who has been doing this his entire professional life, "Then let's go inside and talk about terms." They went inside, all 4 of them, Amelia, Walter, Nathaniel and Elias Cross sat down at the same kitchen table, where the Denver letter had been read, where Walter had written to his son, where Lillian had been doing calculus at 6 in the morning for 3 weeks. Cross took the chair across from Nathaniel, which put him with his back to the window and his face in full light, which Amelia suspected Nathaniel had arranged deliberately by the specific way he gestured towards the seating. She noted that and filed it. She put coffee on because her hands needed something to do, and because offering a man coffee before you dismantled him she had decided the appropriate way to conduct business in her kitchen. Cross looked around the room with the careful, unhurried attention of a man who reads environments the way other men read balance sheets. He looked at Lillian's calculus book on the shelf, at the tin of letters beside the window, at the folder of documents on the counter that Nathaniel had left there this morning. His eyes stopped on the folder. "May I?" he said. "No," Nathaniel said. Cross accepted this without expression. Amelia had decided in the 30 seconds since they'd sat down a considerably more intelligent man than Whitmore. Whitmore had been a tool well made effective for its purpose, but a tool. Cross was the hand that held it. The difference was visible in everything, from the way he sat to the way he didn't speak when speaking would cost him something. "You came a long way," Walter said. "From Denver." "From New York, actually," Cross said. "I came when I heard you were involved." He looked at Walter with the particular quality of a man examining someone he has known a long time through a different lens than the one he started with. "I wasn't expecting you in Colorado. I wasn't expecting to be here." "And yet?" Cross looked around the kitchen again. "Here you are." "Here I am." A silence. The two men looking at each other across 30 years of history, the business done together, and the business refused the 1882 transaction and the 1884 dispute, and everything accumulated between two men who had moved in the same circles long enough to know exactly who the other one was. "What do you want, Elias?" Walter said, quietly, without heat. Cross set his hands on the table. "I want to understand the shape of what I'm facing before I decide how to respond to it." He looked at Nathaniel. "The subpoena is a problem." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "It is. Harmon doesn't have jurisdiction over my New York operations. Harmon has jurisdiction over the Colorado operations that your New York attorney directed through a county clerk who has now given a full written confession." Nathaniel's voice was the voice Amelia had heard him use with Whitmore's lawyer, measured precise, every word placed with the care of someone who understands that in legal conversations, precision is everything. "The confession names your attorney. Your attorney's instructions are documented. The connection to Western Territorial Holdings is documented through the prospectus, which I have a copy of, and through 3 financial transactions that moved through a Denver intermediary, whose records Harmon has already subpoenaed." Cross was quiet. "You have 14 days to appear," Nathaniel continued. "You can fight the jurisdiction. Your lawyers will probably buy you another 30 days with that argument. Harmon will win the jurisdictional question because the crimes were committed in Colorado by people acting on your instructions in Colorado, and federal precedent on that point is unambiguous." He paused. "Or you can discuss terms now this afternoon, and we can arrive at an arrangement that addresses the damage done to the people in this valley without a public trial that will be considerably more damaging to Western Territorial Holdings and its Eastern financing than any settlement could be." Cross looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man who has spent 40 years in rooms like this one on both sides of the table and is now taking the precise measure of the person across from him. "You're good," he said. "Not as a compliment exactly, as an assessment." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I am." Cross looked at Walter. "You taught him." "No," Walter said. "I was too busy building the company to teach him much of anything. He taught himself." A beat. "That's one of the things I'm here to account for." Something moved in Cross's face. Not quite surprised, the surprise was too well managed. But something genuine and brief, the reaction of a man encountering honesty from a direction he didn't expect it. He looked at Amelia. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "what is it you want out of this?" She had been waiting for him to ask her directly. She had known from the moment he walked through her gate that this question was coming, Because a man like Cross always eventually looked for the person in the room who holds the thing he actually needs, and what Cross needed was not legal argumentation. He had lawyers for that. What he needed was the thing underneath the legal problem, the human decision that had created it, and that only another human decision could resolve. She looked at him steadily. "I want this valley made whole," she said. "Every family that was displaced or threatened by altered documents gets their land status restored. Every title that was touched by Pruitt gets independently audited and corrected at your expense. The families who sold under duress get fair compensation for the difference between what they received and the actual market value of what they sold." She paused. "And I want Whitmore to never operate in this state again." Cross listened to all of this without interrupting. "That's expensive," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is. Considerably less expensive than a public criminal trial in which your involvement in a fraud scheme becomes a matter of federal record while your Eastern financing is in active negotiation." Cross looked at her. "I know about the October deadline," she said. "I know who your Eastern investors are. I know that a federal fraud indictment, even a pending one, would require disclosure under the terms of your financing agreement and would almost certainly trigger the exit clause your lead investor put in, specifically to protect against reputational risk." She held his gaze. "I know all of this because Nathaniel explained it to me last night. I wanted to make sure I understood what I was asking for and what it was worth." The kitchen was very quiet. Walter looked at her with an expression she didn't have time to read properly. Nathaniel looked at the table with the expression of a man who is professionally required not to smile. Cross looked at Amelia Carter for a long time at this woman in a farmhouse kitchen in Red Creek, Colorado, who had taken in a stranger from a ditch, held her ground against 6 weeks of legal and physical assault, and was now sitting across from him, with her hands folded on the table, and her voice entirely level, dismantling his position with the precision of someone who had done her homework and was not remotely afraid of what she knew. "All right," he said, finally, quietly. "Tell me what the terms look like." They talked for 3 hours. Nathaniel led the legal structure of it, drafting terms on paper as they went, his handwriting fast and precise. Walter spoke twice, once to clarify the financial mechanism for the compensation structure, and once near the end to say something very quiet and very direct to Cross that Amelia didn't fully hear because she was checking on Lillian, who had come home from school and was being kept in the back room by the specific maternal instruction that this was not a moment for curiosity. When Cross finally stood to leave, the paper on the table had 4 pages of terms and 3 signatures on the final page with space for the 4th. Cross looked at the space, at Walter. "Your signature isn't required," he said. "No," Walter agreed. "But I'd like to give it anyway." He signed. Cross looked at him for a moment. The look of 2 men at the end of a very long road that had taken turns neither of them predicted. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," Walter said. "I have." "She did that." His eyes moved to Amelia. "She reminded me of some things I'd forgotten," Walter said. "There's a difference." Cross nodded once. He picked up his copy of the terms. He looked at Amelia for the last time. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "You are not what I expected." "No," she said. "I don't imagine I was." He left. The carriage went down the road and turned north and disappeared, and Amelia stood on the porch and watched it go, and let herself breathe in a way she hadn't breathed since she'd heard the glass break against the barn wall in the middle of the night. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. "He'll honor it," he said. "Cross is many things, but he honors signed agreements. His reputation depends on it." "I know," she said. "How did you know about the exit clause in the financing agreement?" "I didn't until you explained it last night." "I explained the general structure last night. I didn't mention the exit clause specifically." She looked at him. "I guessed. From the general structure. It seemed like the kind of thing a cautious lead investor would put in." Nathaniel stared at her for a moment. "You guessed." "I made an educated inference. And if you'd been wrong—" "I wasn't." I was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "You weren't." He looked at the road where Cross's carriage had been. "My father was right about you." What did he say? A pause. He said you were the most practically intelligent person he'd encountered in 20 years of dealing with practically intelligent people, and that the difference between you and most of them was that you used it for something worth using it for. He paused. He said it on the second day, in the barn, while he was explaining the bracing modification. She looked at the road, said nothing for a moment. He talked about me on the second day. He talked about you constantly, Mrs. Carter. He talked about you in the letter he sent me. He talked about you in the barn when I arrived. He talked about you last night when we were working on his statement, and he stopped for 10 minutes and told me what you'd said to him the night he finished the letter. She kept her eyes on the road. Her face was entirely still. And what had I said? That writing the letter mattered whether I came or not. Nathaniel's voice was quieter now, the professional precision softened by something more personal. That was what made me get on the train that same night. Not the letter itself. The fact that someone had said that to him and he had believed it and done it. Amelia looked at him. He looked back. The gray eyes, Walter's eyes, and Walter's directness underneath them, the particular Whitaker quality of meaning, exactly what they showed. He missed you, she said. He talked about it once. He said he'd missed you for years before he left. I think that was the hardest thing for him to admit. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, that was longer than his usual moments. He was the best and worst father, he said finally, sometimes in the same hour. He looked at the barn, at the repaired west wall. But he came back, and he came back as... He stopped. Differently than I expected. How did you expect him? I expected Walter Whitaker founder, the man with the answer for everything and the patience for nothing that didn't move fast enough. He paused. I got a man who spent 3 weeks fixing a widow's porch and teaching an 8-year-old calculus. Those aren't incompatible things, Amelia said. No, but it took him 70 years to find that out. He looked at her. And it took you about 3 weeks to show him. She went back inside. Lillian was at the kitchen table book open in the spot that had become hers, the way everything in this house had a spot. Now Walter's chair, Nathaniel's corner of the table with his papers, the shelf where the calculus book lived, the peg by the door where Walter's coat hung next to Thomas's old work jacket that she had never taken down and never would. Is it over? Lillian said, not looking up. The worst of it, Amelia said. Mr. Walter looks different. How so? Like he put something down. Lillian turned a page. He's been carrying something this whole time. I didn't want to say anything. Amelia looked at her daughter. At the dark eyes and the precise observation and the careful tact of not saying something until the right moment. Thomas's eyes. Thomas's timing, the specific quality of a child who had absorbed something from a father she barely remembered and was only now old enough to use it. You're very observant, Amelia said. You told me to pay attention. Lillian looked up. Is he going to stay? The question sat in the room. Amelia pulled out a chair and sat down and looked at her daughter directly. Walter. I don't know, sweetheart. That's his decision. Lillian considered this. What about Nathaniel? Also his decision. What do you want? Lillian said with the particular directness of an 8-year-old who has decided that the adult is not being forthcoming and has chosen to address this by going to the center of the question immediately. Amelia looked at the table, at the 4 pages of signed terms that Nathaniel had taken with him, at the empty coffee cups, at the space on the table where the Denver letter had been for a week and was now filed away in the folder with the corrected deed notation and Garrett's affidavit and all the other documents that had built piece by piece the case that was now moving forward through Harmon's court and the federal marshal's office. I want to stay on this land, she said. I want to see the harvest come in. I want the barn finished and the creek running clear and the tax paid on time. She looked at Lillian. Beyond that, I'm taking it one piece at a time. Lillian appeared to accept this as a reasonable answer. She went back to her book. Walter came in from the porch a few minutes later and sat down in his chair and accepted the coffee. Amelia slid across the table without comment, and they sat in the familiar kitchen quiet that had become over 5 weeks. One of the most comfortable silences Amelia had ever lived inside. It's going to hold, he said. The agreement. Nathaniel said the same. He's right. Walter wrapped his hands around the cup. Cross is a pragmatist above everything else. Pragmatists honor agreements that cost them less than the alternative. What does this cost him? Perhaps $200,000 total by the time the compensation structure is complete and the Colorado operation ends. A pause. It saves him the financing. His October deadline is intact. His Eastern investors never know about the fraud. He walks away damaged but functional. That doesn't feel like enough, she said, for what he did to those families. No, Walter agreed. It isn't enough. Justice rarely arrives at the amount it ought to. He looked at her. But the families keep their land. The altered records are corrected. The ones who were displaced get money that makes rebuilding possible. Pruitt faces criminal charges regardless of the civil settlement. And Whitmore. He paused. Nathaniel has people working on Whitmore specifically. He will not resurface in this state. She nodded, turned the cup in her hands. Walter, she said, what are you going to do? He was quiet for a moment. That depends on several things. Name one. Whether Nathaniel needs me in New York. He said it carefully in the way of a man choosing between two true things and not yet sure which one to choose first. We have significant ground to cover, between us. Things that should have been said years ago that still need saying. I've been here 5 weeks, and we've been talking around the edges of most of it. Because there was other business. Yes, but the other business is mostly settled now. He looked at the table. He wants me to come back, to the company. Not as founder, I think that ship has sailed appropriately. But in some capacity. He said he has questions that need a specific kind of answering, and that I am the only person who can answer them. She looked at him. Do you want to go back? A pause, the honest kind. I want to repair what I broke with my son, he said. Wherever that happens. New York or here or somewhere between the two. He looked at her steadily. But I want to say something to you first before anything else is decided, and I want to say it plainly because I have learned that you prefer plain things. I do, she said. This... He stopped, started again. What has happened here? What you have done, not just for me or for Nathaniel or for this valley, but what you have done with your life by yourself for 2 years and then in the last 5 weeks specifically. I want you to know that I have watched it, and I understand exactly what it cost and exactly what it is worth, and I want you to know that in 40 years of knowing remarkable people, I have not known anyone quite like you. The kitchen was very still. Lillian had gone quiet over her book, in the way that children go quiet when they are listening very hard and hoping not to be noticed. Amelia looked at Walter Whitaker. At the gray eyes that she had been reading for 5 weeks across a kitchen table and a barn doorway and a burning building and a negotiation with a man who had tried to take everything she had. At the face that had arrived at her door as a stranger and was no longer a stranger in any sense that the word applied. That is a plain thing to say, she said. I meant it plainly. She was quiet for a moment. Walter, I am 31 years old, and I have a farm and a daughter and a tax payment that I still need to meet in 26 days, and a burned barn wall that is rebuilt, but still smells like smoke when the wind comes from the west. She looked at him. My life is here. It is specific, and it is mine, and I am not done building it. I know, he said. Whatever comes next, she said. Comes next after the harvest, he said, and after the tax. And after the barn is fully finished and the creek access is legally restored in the corrected filings. He said it with a certainty that was not pressure, but simply the certainty of a man who understands timelines and respects them. I'm not going anywhere before any of that is done. She looked at him. You fixed my porch step on the 4th day. Yes. You didn't ask permission. No, the step needed fixing. She almost smiled. The north fence needs attention. I noticed. The irrigation channel on the east side has a section that's been slow since June. I can look at it tomorrow. She looked at him steadily for another moment. Then she nodded the single decisive nod that meant in her particular language that a thing had been said and received and understood and did not require further discussion at this time. She stood up and put her cup in the basin and went to the back of the house to check on the laundry she'd left this morning, in the practical efficiency of a woman who does not let emotional conversations prevent the work from being done. Behind her, she heard Lillian say, "I knew it," and Walter say, "What did you know?" And Lillian say that she liked you. She made the good bread on day 4. She only makes the good bread for people she actually likes. Amelia in the back room looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she went back to the laundry. 3 weeks later, Judge Harmon's court ruled on the fraud case. The ruling came on a Tuesday morning in September, 2 weeks before the tax deadline. Nathaniel was in Pueblo for it, standing in the courtroom with 3 lawyers and the full weight of the Whitaker name and 40 pages of documented evidence. He sent a telegram that afternoon, which Mrs. Doyle brought out herself for the second time, riding at her comfortable pace with the telegram in her coat pocket, and the particular satisfaction of a woman delivering good news. The ruling was complete. Every altered filing in Red Creek County was declared void and subject to mandatory correction. Pruitt pled guilty to fraud and document falsification and was sentenced to 18 months in the Pueblo County Jail. The civil terms of the cross agreement were incorporated into the court order, which meant they were legally enforceable rather than dependent on Cross's word. Nathaniel had worked that particular piece of architecture into the settlement deliberately and had not mentioned it to Cross until after he signed, which was, Amelia thought, exactly the kind of thing a man learned to do when he had taught himself everything he knew. The compensation payments to displaced families were ordered to be complete within 60 days. The restriction on Amelia's Creek access was officially lifted, corrected in the county record, and stamped with the judge's seal. She was standing at the fence when Mrs. Doyle read her the telegram. Walter was beside her. Lillian was on the fence rail with her calculus book balanced on her knee because she had discovered that she could read and listen to things simultaneously and had been exercising this skill with increasing boldness. When Mrs. Doyle finished reading, she folded the telegram and handed it to Amelia and said, "Well, I suppose that's that." "I suppose it is," Amelia said. Mrs. Doyle looked at her, at Walter, at the repaired barn behind them, and the garden that was finally, after the long, brutal summer, producing properly again, now that the creek water was running through the irrigation channel without obstruction. "I've been in this valley for 40 years, she said. "I have never seen anyone fight the way you fought." "We all fought," Amelia said. "Garrett, the Brevins. You went to 6 families in one morning." "I drove a horse," Mrs. Doyle said. "You built the case." She looked at Walter. "Both of you." She clicked to her own horse and started back down the road with the air of a woman who has said what needed saying and has other things to attend to. The tax payment was made 11 days before the deadline. The money came from 4 sources: the Henderson harvest payment, Mrs. Doyle's loan, a portion of the wage. Amelia had earned helping with the Brevin harvest when Marcus Brevin had insisted on paying her properly, and she had for once accepted, and $60 that appeared on her kitchen table one morning in an envelope with no note. She looked at it. She looked at Walter, who was reading at the other end of the table, with the studied neutrality of a man who is not going to claim ownership of $60 and cannot be compelled to. She looked at Nathaniel, who had come back from Pueblo and was staying in the sewing room now, while Walter had moved to the loft above the repaired barn, which he had claimed was more comfortable than it had any right to be. "This appeared," she said, holding up the envelope. Said Walter, turning a page. "It's exactly $60, she said. "Convenient," said Nathaniel, not looking up from his papers. She put the $60 in the envelope, and the envelope on top of the amount she already had, and she paid the tax on the appointed day, and she walked out of the county clerk's office, the same office where Pruitt's replacement was already beginning the tedious work of auditing every filing that had been touched with the receipt in her hand, and she stood on the step in the September sun and breathed the specific air of a woman who has just paid what she owed with what she earned, and does not owe anyone anything she didn't choose to owe. It felt, she thought, like standing on solid ground, not because the ground had changed, because she had finally stopped bracing for it to give way. Nathaniel stayed for another 2 weeks. He worked from the kitchen table in the mornings, telegraph messages and letters and documents that traveled back and forth to New York by the fastest mail available, and in the afternoons he walked the property with Walter, and asked questions that had nothing to do with legal matters. Questions about the irrigation system and the crop rotation Thomas had used, and why the East Field had underperformed in dry years, and whether the creek access could support expansion in a wet year. Amelia listened to these questions and understood gradually that they were not idle curiosity. She understood what they were building toward, but she let them build toward it at their own pace, because she had learned that the Whitaker men arrived at important things in their own time, and pushing did not make them arrive faster, only more guardedly. On the last night before Nathaniel left for New York, he sat across from her after Walter had gone to the barn, and Lillian was in bed and said, "I'd like to make a proposition." "All right," she said. "The farm's water rights," he said. "When the rail spur goes in, and it will go in, the geography is too good for it, not to the water rights. In this valley will be among the most valuable in western Colorado. Your creek access is the best water access in the valley. Cross wanted it. The next person who comes along will want it too." "I know," she said. "What I'd like to propose," Nathaniel said carefully, "is a legal arrangement that protects those rights permanently. A trust structure established now that puts the water rights beyond the reach of any future purchaser or legal challenge. You maintain full ownership and full use. The trust simply prevents any involuntary transfer sale under duress, legal seizure, anything of that nature." He paused. "It would take 3 weeks to set up properly. I'd do it at no cost. The Whitaker firm has done this kind of work dozens of times." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because the next Whitmore will come," he said simply. "Maybe not for years, maybe not for a decade, but someone will. And when they do, I want you to have something they can't touch no matter what they do or what legal arguments they construct." She was quiet for a moment. "This isn't about the $60. A brief pause. "I have no idea what you're referring to." "Nathaniel." He looked at the table, then back at her. "No," he said. "This isn't about the $60. This is about the fact that you kept my father alive when he was dying on a road, and you kept him whole when he was disappearing into whatever he was trying to disappear into, and what he is now." He stopped. "What he is now is someone who looks at me the way fathers are supposed to look at their sons. And I did not have that 3 months ago, and I am not able to put a value on it, and I would like to do something concrete that has a function." She looked at him for a long moment. "Set up the trust," she said. He nodded. "I'll have the papers ready before I go." "And Nathaniel." She waited until he looked at her. "Come back, when you can. She's working through that calculus book, and she's going to have questions." Something happened in his face that was not quite the Whitaker almost smile. It was the real version, open and unguarded and young, the smile of a man who has just been given something he didn't expect to be given. "Yes, ma'am," he said, for the third time, with the same warmth as the first. He left the next morning with 3 signed copies of the trust document and the contained purposeful energy of a man who has work waiting and knows how to return to it. He shook Walter's hand at the gate, which was not the handshake of 2 men parting. It was the handshake of 2 men who have found their way back to each other and are not finished yet, which is a different thing entirely. He hugged Lillian, who allowed this with the dignity of someone conferring a significant honor. He looked at Amelia and said in a voice that didn't require any extra weight, because the words carried their own, "Thank you for what you did for him." "Thank you," she said, "for what you did for me." He went. Walter watched the wagon until it was gone. He stood at the gate with his hands in his pockets and his face toward the road, and Amelia stood beside him, and neither of them spoke for a minute. "When do you go?" she said. "Not yet," he said. When the north fence is finished, and the irrigation channel is properly sealed, and the east field has been prepped for the spring planting." He turned to look at her. "And when I have talked to you properly about what comes after all of that." She looked at him steadily. "And what comes after all of that?" "That," he said, "is the conversation." She looked at him for a moment. At the gray eyes and the steady face, and the man who had arrived as a stranger in a ditch and had become in 5 weeks the person who knew more about her situation, her real situation, all the layers of it than anyone she had trusted in 2 years. "The north fence will take 3 days," she said. 2 if we start tomorrow." The irrigation channel needs new clay packing on the east junction. I have the clay. The east field prep is a week's work. 10 days if the ground is as hard as it looks. He held her gaze. 12 at the outside. That's 2 weeks. Yes, he said. It is. She nodded, turned toward the house. Then we'd better start tomorrow, she said over her shoulder. Behind her, she heard him follow. She heard the familiar weight of his step on the porch, solid, deliberate, the step of a man who has decided where he is going and is not changing direction. She heard the screen door. She heard Lillian inside saying something about a problem in the calculus book, and Walter's voice answering, beginning to explain, already settling into the rhythm of the evening. She went to the kitchen and started supper. The farm was standing. The title was clean. The water rights were protected. The families of Red Creek were rebuilding slowly, and not without difficulty, but on their own land, and with their own names on their own deeds, which was the only foundation that counted. Somewhere in Pueblo, Gerald Pruitt was beginning 18 months he had earned. Somewhere in Denver, Harlan Whitmore was discovering that the doors that had opened easily before were now requiring considerably more effort. Somewhere in New York, Elias Cross was explaining to his Eastern investors that the Colorado operation had been restructured, which was true, and that the restructuring had been his decision, which was also technically true, and which left out everything that actually mattered about how it had happened. And in Red Creek, Colorado, in a farmhouse with a sound porch step and a repaired barn wall and a garden that had finally come into itself after the long, hard summer. Amelia Carter made supper, while Walter Whitaker explained calculus to her daughter, and the September light came through the window at the angle. It always came at this time of year. The angle, Thomas had once said, was the best light of the whole day, warm and low and honest. The kind of light that showed everything exactly as it was. She had $8 when this began. She had carried $63 of impossibility and 39 days of shrinking time and the weight of 2 years of survival entirely alone. She had driven past reasons to give up and refused each of them. She had done the thing every person who passed that ditch on that August afternoon had decided not to do. She had stopped, not because she was fearless, not because she was certain, but because she was Amelia Carter, and Amelia Carter had never yet met a thing worth doing that was easy, and she had learned a long time ago that the hardest things and the most necessary things were almost always the same thing, and that the only way through them was through them. She had stopped for a stranger in a ditch, and the stranger had turned out to be a man who changed everything, not by arriving with money or power or rescue, but by sitting across from her at a kitchen table night after night, and helping her see that the ground she was standing on was worth exactly the fight she was giving it. She called supper. Lillian came in first, calculus book still in hand, taking her seat with the settled certainty of a child who knows exactly where she belongs. Walter came in behind her and sat in his chair and accepted the plate she set in front of him with the particular quality of a man receiving something he does not take lightly, even when it is simply supper, even when it is simply a Tuesday evening in September. Because some men, when they have lost the habit of ordinary grace, come back to it with a gratitude so complete, it makes every ordinary moment feel like the extraordinary thing it actually is. Amelia sat down. They ate supper. The west wall of the barn held solid against the evening wind. The creek ran clean through the irrigated channel, doing what water does, moving forward, finding the level, making possible the things that could not happen without it. And Amelia Carter, who had survived 2 years alone and 5 weeks of fire and was not done surviving yet, looked at the people at her table and felt the particular weight of a life that was hers fully and completely and irreversibly hers, and knew with the stubborn, unverifiable certainty she reserved for the things that mattered most that this was not an ending at all. It was the first evening of everything that came next,